Surrounded by stoners, alcoholics, and pill poppers. A product of my environment, still I built off her. The percentage rate of me doing any of this shit is slim to none, and I understand every motherfucking bit of it. The name WYTE alone is in the know, and I have children that will spread my knowledge long after I go. And if I don't get a chance to write whatever it is I'm trying to say, no, I probably let it be clear 10 times in 20 different ways. On the road to success, destruction will lie in your path. Even a bite from a snake in the grass can leave you gassed, high stepping around this motherfucker. Failure not an option, cut their head off, keep walking, don't look back, just finish talking. I ain't been through everything, but I done seen a lot. Friends came, bitches went, some homies I forgot. If I could tell them anything, then I probably would not. I got better shit to do, like finish sticking in the plot. I ain't been through everything, but I done seen a lot. Friends came, bitches went, some homies I forgot. If I could tell them anything, then I probably would not. I got better shit to do, like finish sticking in the plot. And I got some stories I can't put in rap form, and it's for good reason. MPD trying to crack a case on me for like 24 seasons. They ain't never gonna catch me with my hands dirty. Killers on my payroll, they won't ever tell you, heard me? I got a tight circle, no knots in my rope, but swear to God, the first to lose focus gon' get a knife to throw. I'm sick of being a nice guy, they bout to feel the weapon. They don't understand that they are only breathing cause I let them. Boss white, believe in karma, but I'm so close to say, fuck them with a naze dick. I got 5 racks to get them out my way. Nah, I'm just kidding, life got bigger plans for those. I got an all access pass to hell, and I'll personally visit them hoes to let them know. I ain't been through everything, but I done seen a lot. Friends came, bitches went, some homies I forgot. If I could tell them anything, then I probably would not. I got better shit to do, like finish sticking in the plot. I ain't been through everything, but I done seen a lot. Friends came, bitches went, some homies I forgot. If I could tell them anything, then I probably would not. I got better shit to do, like finish sticking in the plot. And you ain't helped me out then, why the fuck would you start now? I had a tragedy happen to me, you were nowhere to be found. I picked myself up off the ground and started mobbing harder than before. I'm not the type to look back, I keep my head straight and go. No soul on the planet could imagine my pain. I got scars in my memory bank that bleed on my brain, and I will never forget any negativity brought my way. I got shooters in the bay that's been waiting on me to say, get 'em now, but make 'em watch their own death. Meanwhile, I'm thinking the plot till I am on my last breath. And I ain't been through everything yet, but for now I keep it moving, staying on my job, stacking my bread. What the fuck you doing? I ain't been through everything, but I done seen a lot. Friends came, bitches went, some homies I forgot. If I could tell them anything, then I probably would not. I got better shit to do, like finish sticking in the plot. I ain't been through everything, but I done seen a lot. Friends came, bitches went, some homies I forgot. If I could tell them anything, then I probably would not. I got better shit to do, like finish sticking in the plot.
All right. Well, Ciprian, it's good to see you again. How are you doing today?
Good to see you again as well. Just events here in DC are a constant reminder that people have no idea just how the scale of the forces people deal with on a routine basis. And if you mess up in one way, somebody's going to be out of money and begging in the streets.
So what's going on your end? What are your concerns right now?
Well, do people actually understand the DC budget?
I've always kind of taken that's been a no my entire life.
It's very definitely a no.
Yeah. That's not fun. They got anarchy going on across the United States right now, so add that a little bit of
In
that
the
to everything.
streets or in the government? Because the government doesn't know what it's doing either.
A little bit of everywhere, it looks like. Just a little bit of anarchy for everybody. Just, ugh. Negligence and stupidity all across the board.
You were saying something after I said anarchy in the streets or in the government, because the government doesn't know what it's doing either.
Just a little bit of
Plus, we
everywhere.
had 3 gunshot incidents, including one in which 3 people were shot late last night.
What happened there? I hadn't heard about that yet.
Well, normally it doesn't make national news, but there's a rising murder problem, higher murder rate than Baltimore.
Jesus. I mean, I've seen footage from the streets of DC. It doesn't look safe. It looks like Portland from a lot of the pictures I've seen some of the time. Like, you wouldn't expect that from the Capitol.
There's been a long-standing crime problem here in DC, and in the 90s, so long as it didn't hit the rich neighborhoods, people, well, the important people didn't care about it. Now the rich people are getting hit, so now they care about it.
Yeah. This is the state of the United States right now is just completely horrifying. Just all across the board to know that the Capitol's fallen that bad, that people are just getting murdered and shooting up in the streets, and that everybody's incompetent. It's like it doesn't take much to roll an army across that. I don't feel like to be sure it's protected, but like it's weak. I mean, even what Tucker Carlson kind of made the point of Moscow recently. He's like, look at their railway systems. Like, look at their architecture. All the lights are working. Nothing's spray paint. Look at this. It's like, ugh, that's not great. It's not to say Russia's great either, but
Oh, I've
it
been
does
in
highlight the point.
Moscow. There's the glitzy facade, and then there's the rot underneath.
Oh, I imagine.
We can see the rot pretty openly here in the US.
Yeah. Would you say they
But
could seal it better over there? Or
yeah. I mean, so much of Russia is held together by the thick coat of paint.
makes sense.
The US doesn't have the same coat of paint.
Could see that. Yeah, so what's your take on everything happening right now with Columbia and Yale and LA and Texas and the simultaneous occupation of campuses?
This is going to sound horrible, but a lot of these students are idiots, and they're joining groups like Students for Justice in Palestine for the career benefits, not necessarily because they have any idea what's going on in the Middle East.
No, I think your analysis is 100% right on that.
And that applies to students at elite universities. They aren't necessarily all that bright. And even the bright ones don't necessarily have the life experience to be cynical about political organizing. And then you've got foreign governments like Qatar that throw billions of dollars into propaganda efforts in the United States, and they buy think tanks, Brookings, politicians, and student activist organizing. And student activist organizing is one of the lowest risk activities for a government.
Can you go into that Brookings thing a little bit? What's that about?
Oh, yeah. A number of US think tanks receive money from foreign governments or foreign corporations that are very closely aligned with the government.
Right.
And as a result, they basically steer research papers and lobbying in that government's direction. So if, say, the UAE wants to buy some port facilities in the United States, they can maybe pay a few million to Brookings, and Brookings will put out a paper about how foreign ownership of port facilities is not going to degrade US national security, yada, yada, yada.
So it's media optics.
Basically, yeah.
Okay.
Think tanks, some of them are still legit, but a lot of the ones that open themselves up to foreign donations in large scale ended up basically being bought by foreign governments.
Sounds about right.
So just because someone has a few academic credentials behind their name doesn't mean they're being intellectually honest.
Yeah, I think that's a big lesson of the 2020s for sure. Because, I mean, just take Columbia, for example, over 100 professors signing on to this crap, calling Hamas military action. It's like, yeah, is that what we're calling it? Military action? Seems like there's a lot of other words we could use.
Well, there's another facet to this story. In the 1930s, Columbia and Barnard were hotbeds of communist organizing,
Mm.
including some spies in the FBI who came from Barnard.
Oh, really?
And in the 1970s, a number of the Weather Underground terrorists ended up getting hired by Columbia, or in the 1990s. So Columbia basically became one of the refuges for the elite children who ended up engaging in left-wing domestic terrorism. So there is a generational connection here.
Yeah, because then they go on to have kids, and those kids go on to have kids, and they have those connections from way back when. Same ideas passed down from the family. That makes a lot of sense. That's okay. Jesus.
So my ancestors fled communism. I was born under communism. Now I'm fighting communism, and the children, the great grandchildren of the people who ended up endorsing communism, are here, and a lot of them are pushing the same freaking ideas.
Jesus Christ. And kind of makes me think of that Star Trek episode because I did watch Conscious of the King, the one that you sent me that I should watch, and I thought that the actor, the dictator, was going to be the main villain of the show. The daughter, how that turned out, and how she just becomes ravenous by the end of it, and how she thinks she's fulfilling her father's wish, and the ghosts are all gone. I've taken care of them for you. It's kind of seeing that in the American youth a little bit, to where it's just like they didn't, kind of like her and her father in that instance, she didn't have the historical context or the lessons that he learned. So therefore, she was willing to go on and make the same mistakes. Like, could definitely see a lot of that in our society right now. But really good episode. I really enjoyed that. I appreciate the recommendation.
I mean, the writers in the 1950s and 60s, World War I was still within living memory. The trauma of the 1930s was still very much something people understood on a detailed level. World War II and the atrocities of Nazi Germany was something that people had spent a huge amount of time thinking about, either because they had fled from it or had encountered some of the corpses left by it, or because they encountered people who had. And one of the things we're seeing is the last few World War II vets who understood the magnitude of these choices are dying.
Mm-hmm.
So what's the frame of reference people have? What is their sense of scale of the atrocity or the control or the stupidity? Because if people don't understand the extremes of what Nazism actually was, they're going to simply gravitate and label the furthest thing on their anticipatable political spectrum as that.
Yeah, and then all the college professors and all the online sources are going to keep pushing them in that direction. And meanwhile, they may actually have some grandparents who weren't around during World War II, but pretty close to, who could at least give them some of that historical knowledge and be like, this is what I remember from being a kid, or this is what I was taught in regards to all this. Everybody's just severing family ties left and right, to where so many of these kids now will cut off their grandparents without hesitating. And I did that to my own grandparents for probably about 3 years, and it causes some damage. I'm trying to make up for lost time, for sure. But the grandparents aren't going to be around forever, and a lot of these kids don't realize that, but also simultaneously don't care because they're just old and they don't get it, and they're always saying something off-colored, and their politics just never align with ours, and like we're severing those historical ties like at such a rapid pace, I feel like, in my generation. But yeah, knowledge lost, you know?
Yeah. I routinely see things that, at least until about 5 years ago, I saw older people assume that all younger people in my generation and younger understood, like things about what the heck's a carburetor.
See, that's where you start to lose me because I couldn't tell you.
And I can't either.
Oh, okay, cool.
But I see so many older adults who assume, oh yeah, it's just this. I have no fucking clue. Or, oh, of course they'll read through the footnotes. I'm not so sure about that.
And that's not great. It's definitely a weakness. I feel that myself because, like, carburetor, anything about cars, you try to talk to me about, the mechanics try to talk to me like dude to dude talk, and I'm just like, okay, what do I need to buy? Like, which is a result of my own shortcomings, to be sure. That's something I can correct over time. But I see what you're saying. Like, things are just lost over time. There's a whole South Park episode about it recently where all the handymen become like Elon Musk style rich because everybody just forgets how to do things.
I mean, that is a phenomenon. If everybody is so specialized that they don't know what everybody else is doing, then they can't judge if other people are doing their jobs properly or not. So, for the weird sex education in schools, I read, I looked at the teaching materials for a school, and one of the things in that was to tell little children, second grade and below, to touch certain body parts, and if they get upset, distract them with a ball. I think that's wrong.
That's whoever wrote that should face so many goddamn consequences for even conceiving that idea. Putting that pen to paper, that in itself should be a criminal act.
When I showed that to one of my classmates, he said, well, this was written by education professionals, so it must be legit.
Yeah, and how many professors are fucking their students? Like, dead ass, like, and, you know, Julie Belling, she did a really, really great breakdown of this on her YouTube channel, but she talks about different communist nations that they brought in sex education to earlier and earlier ages, and one of the ways was for them to, you know, kind of drop their defenses in that instance, but, you know, the more sexually active they were, the more they could focus on other things like revolution. You know, get it out of your system and then go to work, do your thing. And I can't give you the full breakdown that she had, but it was pretty spot on. And it's like, you know, it's weakening these kids' defenses. You know, I kind of saw that with the kids going into drag shows. It's like all these white liberal women who want to fucking do the right thing and seem like the cool mom, but they're bringing their children around people who aren't being vetted by the people setting up these events, whether or not they're predators or not. And in most cases, they seem to be, unfortunately, because nobody's taken the time to check that out. But all these kids are seeing is bright colors and music, and oh my god, that one's dressed up as Elsa from Frozen, and it's dropping these kids' defenses. So the older they get, they can't identify predatory behavior. You know, that's one of the reasons I like gravitate to Joshua Slocum so hard. Is his discussion of cluster B is, you know, he'll give you basically a step-by-step on how to analyze these patterns and detect it in the wild, because you kind of see it in all these instances. These kids don't know how to spot predators.
And so much of this, the new sex education, just seems like it's deliberately designed to weaken children's caution towards stuff that could traumatize them.
Yeah, because what does trauma do? Trauma makes you want to go join shit like Antifa. You know, like trauma makes you want to do all sorts of horrible things. Trauma makes you want to go gun down a church. Trauma justifies pedophilia. Trauma justifies being a map. Trauma justifies every act of deviancy you can possibly conceive of in this nation. There is literature now to justify everything purely on the basis of trauma. Oh, you got touched as a kid? Well, that explains why you touch kids. Why should you be judged for that? It's so dark and evil, and it's like kind of like a lot of people I saw who fell out of Antifa or suffered a lot after the protest and had their biggest spirals. They'll talk about their PTSD, 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 PTSD. Okay, I have PTSD too, but there had to come a point after, admittedly, a couple of years where I had to stop fucking talking about my PTSD and do something about it. But our therapists aren't teaching kids to do something about it. They're teaching them to live in it. You know, I think Abigail Schreier's done an amazing job of exposing that. But yeah, they want kids to live in their trauma so they can be manipulated into being little warriors.
There's the old observation that a lot of the nastier Balkan nationalists ended up trying to paint every individual, every little bit of suffering as the fault of an enemy ethnic group, either to distract people from the misdeeds of their own politicians or as an excuse to go to war with another group and thereby gain more power.
Like cis straight white men.
I mean, American identity politics seems even stupider than Balkan ethnic politics.
Right? At least it would probably have to be a little nuanced back then. Now you could just say just about anything and it'll be accepted by the masses no matter how dumb it is.
Did you see the so-called cubed hoax? One thing that James Lindsay et al. Did was take some parts of Mein Kampf, change the target group, and got it published.
Explain that a little bit. Change the target group how?
Changed it from Jews to straight men.
Oh God. And got it published?
Yeah.
Jesus fucking Christ.
To some extent, you can predict the twists of left-wing identity politics by simply looking up Nazi ideology and seeing and just switching the groups a bit.
All these false equivalencies. Like, I think it might have been even at Columbia, one of the protest videos, but I think there was like a professor that was saying something about, or no, it wouldn't have been Columbia. I think it was something about abortion. They say something about something like abortion, and then all of a sudden they're being called a Holocaust denier. And then whoever called them a Holocaust denier like had to issue a retractment immediately afterwards. But people really love to jump on the Nazi thing. No matter how far away they are from the line that is Nazi, they really like to try to jump at it and just see how close they can get, and always thinking that they've made it past the line and that they've made their point. And it's like, no, these words have real connotation. And now we're living through the era where the wolf has come in. Everybody's been screaming wolf, and now no one knows the wolf is lurking around the fields, and it's going to eat all the Jewish students. So glad we got to use that word excessively for the past 10 fucking years.
And this was predictable even back in the 1990s. A number of historians had pointed out that by excessively using the word Nazi and fascist, you weakened the sense of what it was and thereby made it harder to spot genuine cases. And I think right now we've basically hit that point.
Well, and we're starting to do it with a lot of other words too. Like even groomer, I'm glad we had the word. I'm glad we had gays against groomer. People like to overuse that word now too.
It's
And
basically meaningless at this point.
yeah, it's there's another word that I had in my head too. They're conspiracy theorist. You know, people like me who, and a lot of my moments, I will become a conspiracy theorist, and those, it's very clear when I am, but I'll just be talking about regular Antifa stuff, communist stuff, just normal stuff
Everyday.
that doesn't get too crazy. Yeah, and people think that I'm a conspiracy theorist over that. And meanwhile, you have real conspiracies out there, or like the guy who set himself on fire outside of the Trump trial. I don't know if you read some of his literature. The scary part about that, a lot of it was kind of right. And I think that the more people are smearing like with that term conspiracy theorists, and the more they're taking off people who are a little bit more down that rabbit hole, who are more well put together. Like Last American Vagabond, that was a really good one. You know, Alex Jones back when he was able to be on YouTube. Sure, he was crazy, for sure. And sure, there's plenty of controversy, but we keep taking away all these people who are a little more collected, who have more experience, who are a little more willing to take on the challenge. But now you have all these little people that are trying to do it themselves because of all the conspiracy theorists smearing, and because of all the smearing simultaneously, they're thinking they're more right. So they're getting crazier and crazier and crazier to the point where they're willing to set themselves on fire, whether that's over reptiles or whether that's something as pretty real as what the guy at the Trump trial set himself on fire over. Like, I guess he had spent some years doing lawsuits over the Clintons, and his whole thing was they're trying to crash the global economy and enslave humanity. And I'm kind of sitting there reading his pamphlets, and it's like, you want to call him crazy, but I'm like, he might have just snapped being unable to handle some things. And it's just always, all conspiracy theorists are the same, I guess. It becomes a real problem and people are snapping. Because those are people who, in many cases, are mentally unwell, especially if you spend a lot of time in dark subjects, you're going to take a twist. And if you don't know how to manage that, then society's going to pay for it.
There's always going to be people who suspect a conspiracy. In any large population, millions of people, some of them are going to be mentally ill, some of them are just going to have too much suspicion, some of them are going to be traumatized or have incomplete information. When that goes from a trickle to a flood, that tends to be a result of people in power being grossly incompetent, being grossly secretive, or just generally being dishonest in very obvious ways. And we've got all three right now. So right now, the government and major social institutions has almost completely lost trust. So the only rational thing people can do is try to read between the lines and speculate. And oftentimes that takes the form of a conspiracy theory. Because you need a bit more information about the system to accurately anticipate when something is incompetence and when something is a conspiracy. But
Yeah.
if you don't have that, all you've got is conspiracy.
Yeah. And I don't know. I'm just hoping people can find the healthy balance, but
That's not
they just
likely
keep
to
taking.
happen.
No, it's not. And the more censorship goes on too, it's like, I don't know, people they have to be allowed to present their ideas freely, no matter how crazy they are, because when people come in to step in the void for themselves, like I said, it's just going to get crazier and weirder. And we already, I don't know, need all the conspiracy theorists to come together right now. We need to unify it and not set ourselves on fire. I think that story just made me really sad to see, because at first I was just like, all right, this guy's a nut. And then the more I looked into it, I was just like, this guy is just broken. And, schizophrenic, probably, but just decided that this is what he felt he had to do, a crazy act in a crazy world. And I really don't want to see more of that, because that dude would probably make for one hell of a podcaster, you know?
Uh, 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 I'm crossing my fingers, hoping that we aren't going to run into that yet. But when you see one dramatic act, we're likely to see a string of them until it basically becomes something the public is so desensitized to that nobody wants to be a copycat.
Well, this is like the sixth self-immolation or whatever in the last year. Like, I think 3 people in the past 4 or 5 years have set themselves on fire on the White House lawn. Anytime that happens, nobody ever really mentions it around me. I mean, it'll be talked about online, but in real world, no one's like, "Oh my God, did you hear about the guy who set himself on fire on the White House lawn?" I'm usually the one talking about it, if at all.
Well, people are scared of copycats. So media are taught not to broadcast footage of people burning themselves alive, or sometimes they just have a still photo.
Yeah.
So same thing with school shootings. They don't want people to get the fame from a school shooting, so they're normally averse to reporting on it. What made the Covenant school shooter so interesting was that it was clearly ideologically motivated. So then you have more of an ethical question in journalism. Do you report on it because it's an ideological attack, or do you not report it because you don't want to give them the post-death satisfaction?
Did you see the manifesto that Steven Crowder got out after that?
I did. It should not have been hidden from the public.
Mm-mm. Like, people need to understand that's really how a lot of the most mentally unwell extreme people in the LGBT community, that's how they think. It really is. It's just a matter of acting on it. And that's not to generalize, but it's just to say there's a lot of people like that in the community, and people from the outside aren't helping by wanting to try and hide that. Like, the way you help communities is to expose their bullshit. Like, the LGBT community needs help addressing its pedophilia, its mental health crisis, its problem with racist and sexist, these people who hate all cis, straight, white, whatever. That's racism, that's sexism, that's judging somebody based on their sexuality. That's things that we should not be tolerating in this community whatsoever. But we have, to the extent where now that person went into, Covenant Church and gunned down everybody expecting a parade. Oh, and what did she fucking get? A parade. And everyone walking around with 7 fingers in the air for the 7 victims, one of them being the shooter. And, giving speeches and signs and confetti. Like, she got what she knew was coming. And that's the thing, is now it's accepted to the point of, I'm going to be the Joker. I'm going to be your new hero. I'm going to be the one to finally do it. But not only do it, but give you permission to do it as well. Now you can all join me now that you know we're all capable of doing this. Look how many I got. How many can you get? That's what it's starting to be. And eventually those people are going to organize, and they're not going to be lone radicals. They're going to be groups and militias and factions. And because that's right there, what I'm seeing right now is an open market. I see thousands of disaffected American youth ripe for the taking. If you have the right club or organization and you come in, and I'm not talking like things like Sunrise Movement or Black Lives Matter or anything like that. I'm talking like some real jihadi shit. These kids are ready to go. All they have to do is be recruited. And I think that's what we're seeing on college campuses right now. I think that amongst the chaos, a lot of these kids are going to get recruited.
I think you're right about the emotion, but I don't think that a lot of these kids have the mindset for the organization that it takes to be an effective force. More
I
for
agree
a
with
lot of
that.
individual chaos.
I
So
agree with that. I'm just worried about the people that do. It's not to say that they're going to get high up right off the bat, but they're going to be used. And I'm just worrying about what's brewing behind the scenes right now. When I think of the state of America right now, I just think of armies gathering in various different ways all across the country, happening in the shadows, weapons being brought together, men and women being brought together, plans being brought together. I really feel like we're going to see a flashpoint.
I mean, would you
And
believe
this is
that
just me, but you know,
5 years ago I was more worried about uh, right right wing radicalism and lone wolf terrorism? The growth in Antifa and of trans activism and the proliferation of jihadi ideology in the U.S. that's that dwarfs that as a threat.
and to put into perspective too, I live in a little more of a rural area, kind of suburb. I have Nazis in my neighborhood. I have white supremacist militia in my neighborhood. There's also cops. There are also a couple of houses with rainbow flags and Trump flags. There's a lot of mixed people in here, but I know I'm surrounded by militias right now. There's probably at least 20 in this neighborhood around me. I'm not really scared of them. That's not to say that I don't think that ideology is twisted, fuck Nazis, fuck white supremacy, all that. I don't expect them to come burning down the neighborhoods or to go smash downtown. Now, what I worry about is the more anarchy and chaos the left creates, the easier it's going to be for them to recruit. 100%. That's what this book's about, the Turner Diaries. It's about America being in a state of chaos, kind of like it currently is, and they're jumping around recruiting people off of that basis. So that is happening. But as far as like physical violence, threats, being doxxed for this podcast and being hunted down, no, I'm still more worried about Antifa than I am the Nazi down at the corner. That's a fucking problem because those people, I used to be scared of them. They were the ones I was marching against. They were the ones I thought were going to come and kill us. And But I think they're waiting for a power vacuum so that they can go head to head with the communists, which are going to be these kids, which are going to be the organizations that come, because they see the writing on the wall too. They're just waiting for the soldiers that they can battle. These college kids aren't the kids they can battle. They can come and they can pretend like they're defending the neighborhoods with the right-wing militias, and occasionally they try to integrate, and a lot of the time they get pushed out because the militias don't want to deal with that Nazi shit. But it's just going to get worse the worse it gets on the left, for sure. But I have less fear of that than I do, my own peers, like seeing something that I'm putting out on my podcast and trying to retaliate. It just feels like the Twilight Zone.
Probably because there's a lot more very, very clear people who say that Nazi ideology is wrong, who say that a lot of this right-wing militia ideology is dangerous and unproductive. And at least when I was living in Minneapolis, I saw a lot more people applauding a lot of the low-level political violence than opposing it from the left. So the 2008 RNC in Minneapolis, so political conventions oftentimes go to cities that oppose them in order to kind of soak up the local ideas, see how they can expand their voter base, normal politics in a democracy.
Right.
A bunch of people in Minneapolis decided to attack the delegates.
Oh, geez.
And had you heard about that?
No.
See? So my unit was actually activated to help provide security for that.
Because you're National Guard, right?
I was in the National Guard, yeah. And cops infiltrated and engaged in some illegal wiretapping of the group that was planning to do the attacking. And these guys were guilty, but the cops also broke the law in their surveillance. Mm-hmm. So several people were accused, and they were brought up under the Minnesota Patriot Act. And whether they should have been prosecuted or not, because let's remember the cops did break the law, there were a lot of people who were thanking them for what they did.
As in the people who attacked the delegates?
Yeah.
Who are the... Well, no, it's the RNC, so the Republican.
RNC 8.
We just really want violence in this country.
It does feel
we
like
really want it. Like, there's a comfort period for sure, and that was too good.
It feels like a lot of people are itching for the drama of violence because they're not satisfied with the drama of building something.
Yeah.
And I don't think people here have the kind of the horror at violence. I mean, there's the horror of interpersonal unpleasantness, but is there the sense of horror that, oh God, this person was shot, they're dying. Now they're never going to be able to accomplish what they could have accomplished. It seems like there's a complete psychological removal from the possibility of death.
Everybody's created a bubble. No one wants their bubble popped, and I've even heard multiple people describe it as a bubble. And it's like, no one else in this world gets a goddamn bubble. Like, one of the reasons I do bring some of the more violent imagery onto my channel, or I'm willing to show certain images, is because there is kind of this sense of my generation of, when are you guys gonna fucking look at what we've been looking at? When are you gonna see what we've been seeing? When are you gonna understand the gravity of the situation? Most Americans are just in the space where, well, just so long as it's not happening on my street. And like myself, like, I'm sitting here where I've seen full-blown anarchy and chaos in my street. I've seen kids get shot with tear gas canisters. I've seen people get their heads caved in. I've had guns pointed in my face. I've had so much crazy shit happen. And the biggest of those instances happen in 3 minutes. So for me, that's all it takes is three fucking minutes. But people don't, there's people who don't care. You know, it's just like, well, why are you so upset about this? Or why are you shaken up? Or why are you always on this subject? Or why do you care so much? Or what can you possibly do about it? Why don't you just be quiet about this? And it's just like, you try living through that shit. And to know that it's the lighter end of things, that this is very, very light in comparison to protests and riots that I've seen in the Middle East. People in this country have no goddamn appreciation for their own situation. They have no gratitude for the conditions they live in. They just want to keep it. But in order to actually keep it, you're going to have to address some of the darkness that we're putting out as a result of our own personal negligence. Like, most Americans just tune out.
Um,
It's just heartbreaking.
Americans have been known for being optimistic ever since the colonial period, but to me, it kind of feels like ever since the 1950s, there's been a kind of forced optimism that has stopped people from acknowledging very real risks and problems. And
I think a
that
lot of that.
forced op-
Oh, sorry.
and that forced optimism has just been getting worse and worse with each generation, and as people are removed from the practicalities of life.
Would you attribute a lot of that from just wanting to try and get as far away from World War II and the atom bomb and the Nazis, just all of that as much as possible, at least in the beginning?
In the beginning, it was observed that a lot of people become more depressed if they just surround themselves with depressing reminders. So
Who'd have thought that?
a degree of forced optimism helps people just carry on and force themselves through the periods of horror and misery until they can become kind of functional. But if that spills over into all aspects of society, including the expectations children build about the world, and you have a self-perpetuating system of making people more and more optimistic, then when people no longer encounter the practicalities of life, that's just going to become uncontrollable.
Yeah.
So if you talk to some highly educated people, masters in international relations, when you tell them that the Houthis just attacked a ship in the Red Sea, they don't think grain prices are going to skyrocket. How are we going to get food to Kenya? They don't think about the ramifications of that. To them, it's, oh, a ship got hit. I guess that's like a truck having a bad tire.
Yeah, that's people in my sphere. You know, I'll be sitting here. I mean, like, this attack means that gas prices are going to go up. This means that eggs are going to go up. And every single time they're like, conspiracy theorists, you know, you're just being crazy and you're just being an alarmist again. And then a month or two later, why is everything so expensive? It's like, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. Nobody could have predicted it would have gotten more expensive, I guess. Who could have thought? I don't know. Like,
I, I mean,
and it's just like,
I speculate that I mean, there's a thing known as a planning bias. People predict their own ability to get things done based off of their most optimistic assumptions, not their most probable assumptions.
okay.
And that applies to organizations, not just individuals. So when you have a long string of being surrounded by the most optimistic predictions, people aren't going to adjust them just because something bad happens. Oh, is it possible to steer a ship from Ukraine to Kenya through the Red Sea? Yes. Is it probable that it's going to do it safely? Maybe. Will the insurance rates be sky high? Yeah. So the whole issue of reliability seems to have, in the past, people knew things would fail, so they wanted things to be reliable. Now, people have forgotten that things can fail, so they don't care if it's reliable. So if you send a ship from Ukraine to Kenya, I mean, it will probably make it there in one piece, but there's no guarantee. But if you can't think that something bad's going to happen, you're not going to realize when something bad does happen.
Yeah. God, this just applies for so many different things, and so many different scales, and and the thing is too, it's like I agree with you in that we expect everything to function, but we're simultaneously plagued with all these instances of just periods of everything falling apart, and then months going by in certain areas or cities where it's just crazy conditions, high gas prices, everything falling apart, natural weather patterns that are coming, not seemingly unnatural weather patterns. It feels like sometimes just coming in and wrecking everything and then leaving. But then it's like you said, but at least a couple months down the line, it'll all get better again. But eventually, that's just gonna stop. One day, it's just never gonna get better again, at least for a long period of time. And I don't know. I think I got to see that with our power being out for about 3 weeks back during the winter storm because we're basically camping in our house. Everything was frozen outside. Everything was like transformers were exploding. So we were listening to trees fall because the ice was so heavy. So it sounded like gunshots and cannon fire all night. But then there was like green and blue flashes all over the city and power lines exploding and screams and cars crashing and trees going through the roof.
How are the pipes?
A lot of them busted. Our water was only screwed for I think 3 or 4 days max, and thankfully we just got to go work all day shifts basically to get out of the house whenever that happened. But no, a lot of people for a while couldn't drink their water. Some people got it worse for I think 4 to 5 weeks even. Like the whole side of Springfield that I live on just got completely leveled. It's like I said last time, it's like a wildfire came through when all the ice cleared out and they cut down all the branches, over by where the river is. There's just sticks coming out of the ground and dirt. And then there's the river right there. And you're seeing that all over the place. And it's starting to look more and more like Louisiana, where everything's twisted and the trees are all knocked over and it looks like a Dr. Seuss book, kind of. It's starting to get a little bit more like that. And Eugene had a winter storm kind of similar not too long ago.
Oh,
But
fun.
yeah, and it sucks because everybody's getting their own craziness right now. But to watch people fall apart over the course of that, and oh, I didn't think I needed to get food, or oh, I didn't consider this, or oh, I didn't think about this, and you're seeing how many people that's happening to, and then kids, the teenagers, broken, no cell phones, didn't know what to do.
There's an article, complex systems will not survive the competency crisis. The more reliable every step in a complex system is, the more likely it's going to break down. And that's one of the reasons why there's so much fuss about the aviation industry. It's incredibly complicated, but it's also incredibly predictable. But if any of those steps start to become done shoddily, an extremely expensive plane with a lot of lives can crash. So we've had a heck of a lot more safety incidents than we used to. There's just not there's not enough basic competence to keep things running the way we expect them to.
No, and I don't know about you, but I can see it everywhere. I wonder if DC is the same, but here in Oregon, everywhere you go, every worker has a cell phone in their hands. Half of them have this eat shit, fuck off look. They'll sigh at you, they'll roll their eyes. You can tell they don't want to be there. It looks like they're going to get off the shift and put a bullet in their brain that they look so out of it. It's like no one no one at work wants to work or cares to work, or they see themselves trapped in that position too. I feel like with a lot of people just going into lower end jobs like being a cash register, dishwasher, something like that. They're like, well, this is as good as it's ever going to get, instead of seeing it as an opportunity for growth in whatever way that may be. It's just nihilism is a hell of a drug,
That
I
sounds like a
think.
very basic lack of leadership. That it's the people. Yeah, people are currently in a low level position, but you're still building connections and skills, and you should rationally have a hope of better things. But bad leadership means that people simply lose hope. I've worked under good people and bad people in a restaurant. I did not enjoy my time in the restaurant. You could say I was maybe overeducated for it. But there were managers who were pleasant to work with, and I was glad to have a paycheck, and managers who were just, oh God, I'm just counting the minutes. And I think a lot of managers can't manage anymore.
I agree with that in full. I agree with that, but also the fact that at least with my generation, and I feel like it's bleeding out into the older generation because the older generation wants to be like the youth sometimes, but the idea of like quiet quitting or, oh, well, I'm making this much, therefore I will only work this much. It seems like in instances I've been in places with really good bosses, really great leaders, managers, people who really get it done, work well with their employees. There'll just always be these kids coming in who are like, if I'm not making $25 an hour, this place can fuck off. And it's like, yeah, these kids need to learn to get past that. It's really, and I'm seeing more and more like 18 and 17-year-olds coming in, and every year it's just getting worse and worse and worse and becoming more and more entitled to where they're mixing their own politics with it to where I think that's also where you're starting to see a lot of the communist stuff starting to creep into that generation is they're disgruntled with the workforce, but this is about how disgruntled they get is they don't see the opportunity before them. They just immediately walk in and they're like, well, the statistics say that the federal minimum wage should be $25 or $30 an hour if you account for X, Y, and Z. So until I make that, this place can eat shit, and I'm only going to put in half of the workload. Is really what seems to be prevalent with people my age and younger.
Do you think when a lot of people say they hate capitalism, they just mean they hate their job?
Yeah. Yeah, without hesitation. Yeah. And I mean, most jobs suck. I've
Yeah.
worked at Wendy's and Subway, all sorts of places that, good God, it's hell on earth. But they're jobs. And other
But
places don't have those jobs. Other places would kill to be making that fucking bitch her fucking sandwich, no matter what she's calling you. Like, there's no, like I said, there's no gratitude in this country for our position, even for the little things. It's just like, woe is me. I'm making $18, $19 an hour. No, how about good for you? You're making $18, $19 an hour. And yeah, it could be better. And maybe with a better attitude, you can get there, but then you have to get the idea of responsibility in their heads. And I've had people laugh at me for suggesting that people in my generation need to be more responsible because it's always, well, the generations before us broke it because they didn't want to take responsibility for anything. So it's like, okay, well, if this generation then doesn't take responsibility for anything in turn, then what's the generation after you going to be saying? Like, where's the logic there? You don't get to say that this generation opted out, therefore I'm going to. That doesn't work.
um, I know Marxism had the idea of the inherent dignity of labor, but I just don't see that from a lot of Western communists. And I mean, some people say what a lot of these activists are Marxist Leninists. No, nothing there matches up with Marxism Leninism, other than maybe a few symbols.
Like, you don't see the truckers and the oil field workers coming out as communist. You see the Starbucks baristas, the cashiers come out as it. Like, these, like I said, this is important work, and it's not to say that work in America isn't important and everybody doing their job isn't doing a good job and should continue to do so. Like, being a McDonald's worker is important. Being any of these things is important. But is it as crucial to the backbone of society as someone who spends 7 days a week, 12 months a year, driving back and forth all over the country, delivering millions of goods to people?
Heck
Or
no.
oil field workers who are like, are soldiers, or just so many other people, post office workers, teachers. Like, those are the real backbones of society. And yes, it's important to feed them, but they are the workers. And my generation just doesn't get that because, well, all those positions are taken over by older people or old rich white men or people with power. Therefore, the people in those positions must be the oppressors. So
Well,
therefore, we can't even possibly hope to get into there.
I hear that there's a constant shortage of welders. It's not because the welders aren't getting paid huge amounts of money. It's that nobody wants to become a welder.
Oh, that's just funny to me because the kids who went into welding when I was in high school, they're like, dude, I'm gonna be rich one day. You just watch. Like, that's good work. That's good money. Yeah, there's like these kids don't even have hobbies anymore these days. That's a sad thing too. It's like, what are you doing with your free time? Like, idle hands are the devil's playground. Like, if you're not doing nothing, and no, sitting on your phone all day isn't considered doing nothing, no matter what it is, you know. But yeah, no hobbies, no ambition, no drive, no goals. And it just sounds so horrible to say that about kids because I know there's like a lot of consideration whenever I say this to people my age group. They're like, "Well, you're sounding like an old man." And old people always say, "Well, the next generation this. Well, they'll never
Well,
do
the
this."
old
Well,
generation were young people one day. I mean, I know a guy who was a young guy in World War II. He was 18 and building hospitals to deal with the wounded in Australia,
jeez.
and he lost a hand.
Oh, damn.
But he was a young guy. He got to see bits of the world. I know another guy. He went to Vietnam because frankly, almost everybody in his generation went to Vietnam. The draft evaders, they were the young rich kids.
Yeah.
Ordinary people went to Vietnam. And he got to see the world. He got to see Japan, Korea, Vietnam, Indonesia. He got to learn about explosives and engineering. And he eventually gained education. But the fact is, he was a young guy, irritated at the school system, irritated at the older generation that he thought was a bit too stodgy. And now he's a guy saying, we kind of fucked up the school system.
Hmm. Like, that's a part of the evolutionary process for humans. Like, we need that. We need that so much. And the fact that it's devalued, that old people can't open their mouths without young people looking at them these days and being like, just discriminating on based on their age. You are of a certain age, therefore your opinion must be invalid because you don't have the correct terminology or you don't have the correct life experience or you're not experiencing America through the eyes of someone my age right now. So how could you possibly get it? Despite the fact if you're 50 years old, you've lived through a million and one different things, but is usually come from kids who haven't made it through history class. So, but yeah, I don't know. And it sucks too because like watching all these kids go out and protest, you're seeing like millions of kids want to join in on this Palestine Israel shit. It's like Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, he's not paying attention to that right now. He doesn't give a shit what you are doing at your college protest right now. But you know what he may give a shit about in the future? If you are actually trying to get a job in a field that might actually contribute to changing some of the things you want to change. And if you're angry at something Benjamin Netanyahu's doing, then maybe find yourself in some sort of position where you can try to make change or at least deal with some of this damage being presented by the Israeli government. Because, yes, the Israeli government is not innocent right now. What's happening is atrocious and it is genocide. And I do not side with the Israeli government or Hamas. I side with the Jewish people and the Palestinian people who decide that they don't want to be a part of that Hamas bullshit. And I hope everybody can find a peaceful resolution. And I hope that the right people can be held accountable. But if you really want to make change, like, these kids aren't trying to find work. They're not trying to find jobs. They're not trying to become diplomats or foreign aid workers or volunteer even for anything. They just want to scream when you can see that passion in them. They have enough passion to scream and parade and do all this shit. But if it were channeled in the proper place, god damn, that'd be amazing.
There are a lot of people in the foreign policy establishment who actually got their jobs because they were in Students for Justice for Palestine.
Oh, jeez.
It is basically a hiring pathway to a lot of elite institutions. So it's not necessarily that they believe it, but participating in it is a good career move for a lot of kids.
Yeah. Eesh. So the way I describe it, this just all just feels like one big spiritual trap. It's not to say that it's a distraction because these things are happening and people do want to express themselves, but seeing what's happening at these college campuses, these kids are hijacked. Like part of their soul at the current moment has just been taken by some angry, malevolent force that just wants to rage and destroy. And it doesn't mean it's going to be there forever. It doesn't mean it's going to have it forever, but
Well,
it's making me more sad than angry to watch at this point.
do people understand that hatred oftentimes destroys the person expressing the hate as much as the person who receives it?
It's, and I mean, it's the story of Venom. That's the story of the Sith. That's the story of like so many of our villains throughout, movies and comics and books and basically all of our fucking villains. You'd think at this point we'd have it down as a society, but I don't know. I think we're getting closer in some regards, but I don't know. I actually broke. I don't smoke anymore, but I had a cigarette yesterday just because seeing everything happening at the campuses just kind of broke me a little bit. And I'm like, this is Black Lives Matter 2.0. This is the next thing. This is what it's going to lead into. This is what we did. And so many of those kids there are just extensions. So many of those kids probably were at Black Lives Matter or were a part of Antifa and just never got out of it, which means that a lot of what we're seeing right now are the more extreme elements for the people who have been there the longest. So that scares me even more.
There's a certain aspect of the moral reasoning that just doesn't make any sense to me. Because to me, a complex society requires a degree of trust to function. But expressly going out and trying to intimidate people into silence seems like it's going to cause some elements of that system to break down. So, for example, in the Soviet Union, you had a lot of industrial accidents. Why? Because people didn't feel free expressing their concerns about safety or unreliability. So you got into crazy situations like a submarine sank. Navy officials ended up intimidating sailors to hide that there were bad training on their part, and blamed the engineers who built the thing. The engineers were blaming the sailors for bad training and blaming the Navy. The secrecy and intimidation meant that there was no clear way to identify the actual engineering and safety and training problems that led to the deaths of about 80 people.
Before talking to you, I really did have it more in my mind. And I still believe that it's happening in between, that people are intentionally derailing and planning explosives. And I do think that there's sabotage happening within the chaos. But the more I think of the things that you've been presenting to me as a lot of what we're seeing is dysfunction of incompetency or due to negligence of reporting because not feeling safe to do so, stuff like that. I can 100% see that more. I think I'm definitely leaning more towards that way. Like I said, with still believing there's acts of sabotage happening. That's even scarier, though, because that just means, I mean, a lot of these instances that they're not targeted, that they're isolated, that they're just random, that they could just happen. That it doesn't have to be a terrorist cell targeting your train. It just has to be a matter of a couple of loose bolts. And just to know that that's from somebody in the workplace not being able to say, like, hey, boss, new guy's been doing something wrong because maybe they've been like lashed out at before for having brought up problems with other people. I could see it, and it scares me even more, I think.
That's a constant problem. And it's been like that for a few decades. It's getting worse, but it's been like that for a while.
So it's kind of like the cyber attacks, like it's been happening forever, but now we're just starting to see it now that it's breaking past the wall. Kind of more and more is just non-concealable, basically.
The problems are getting so big we can't hide them.
Makes you wonder about what big stuff's been hidden. Things we haven't heard about yet. I mean, like the Afghanistan withdrawal. If you've seen that video that just came out, they hide some really big shit.
I haven't. I've heard that there were some crazy negotiations between Trump announcing his withdrawal plan and Biden scrapping it. So
Yeah. The videos were at Kabul airport from when the blast went off, and then initially they were like debunking claims when it happened that there was gunfire, and now there's Marines coming out with the video because I guess they had GoPros, and
what?
there's
They were
yeah,
denying it?
I think they were denying it at first, but so I actually saw this on CNN, and it's one of the so it could be cloudy, but this is one of the few times I've watched CNN and it felt pretty unbiased. It was just a soldier sitting there being like, "Yeah, we were there. The blast went off. People started running, and then they're like talking about a watchtower nearby. They're like, we don't know if it was the Marines or one of our guys, but it seemed like somebody was shooting from the watchtower potentially into the crowd." So the debate going on right now is, did U.S. forces fire on the crowd in Kabul? Uh, there was claims that it could have been the Taliban at the time, but I think now it's an open question as to whether or not U.S. Marines opened fire on citizens at the airport. And the video is pretty goddamn intense. And I don't have any judgments one way or the other. I just know what I've seen, but big video to hide, it feels like.
Why would they even try? Over optimistic idiots, that's why, and I keep on having a hard time believing it myself. Because at the tail end of a dysfunctional government, you have people who think they can get away with things that they no longer can get away with, but they're just so out of the loop or over optimistic that they keep on doing things that everybody else knows won't work.
Yeah, or I will say that's one of Trump's flaws. I feel like, for as much as I'm willing to like give him his positives now, I feel like one of his problems was he did kind of, in some sense, want loyalists around him, and I feel like he did create an atmosphere about him where people would feel afraid to speak out. And I think in that probably created some blind spots. Putin, he does that as well. Like, who wants to tell Putin no?
I mean, his specific, I analyzed the specifics of Putin's invasion strategy, and I pointed out about 4 days before it became commonly discussed that Putin was lied to by his foreign intelligence chief, claiming that there were pro-Russian sympathizers stockpiling supplies. I could tell he was being lied to because of what he was doing. And he's that kind of person. Putin's very good at interpersonal domination and intimidation, but he wasn't there because he knew how to run an organization. He was there because he could terrify people.
Yeah. Where do
Isn't
you fall? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
and the Tsar Nicholas II, he was the same way. He had people lying to him constantly about things like, "Oh no, we didn't have any alcohol riots during the mobilization. There were alcohol riots." So he was being lied to, so he thought things were going better than they were, and that led to the revolution.
Do you think, with everything going on in Russia, while we're on the subject, because I personally don't think it's going to happen. I don't think Russia has the intentions of doing it. But do you think that Russia has the intentions of invading Poland and Europe abroad?
I don't think they have the capability to do it, much less the intent.
Yeah.
Now, could we see something like the trying to send a whole bunch of people from Syria to try to illegally immigrate into Poland? Yeah. But for an irregular armed confrontation, heck no.
I'm worried that NATO's going to act on that presumption. I think that's a big thing I'm scared of right now because it seems like they're getting all the placements ready. They're getting the soldiers, they're getting the ships, they're getting the tanks in line. And it seems like we're ready to pounce on Russia for something they're not going to do. That they've made very clear we're not going to do. There's no strategy to it. There's no rhyme or reason. We just want our territory in Ukraine. Only recently learning that Kiev was once Russia's territory at one point. Like, I get that it gets a bit dicey, and I don't know a lot about it to be sure. So like, there's certain things I don't comment too much on. But like, it seems like Russia's focuses mainly are on Ukraine, and yeah, grievances with the West for sure. The more we push and push, but as far as the problems in Europe, I see more of that coming from Islam and a lot of these terrorist groups getting in via immigration, because it seems like what's going on in the West is happening just as equally in Europe and Canada. It seems like we're all going to get taken out together, but I don't see Russia being so much of an active military player in that.
Well, it's easier to look like you care about national security if you're threatening another country than dealing with internal threats. Because when you deal with internal threats, then you piss off some local pressure group or power base for one of the major political parties. So the UK, for example, had a concern about Islamic extremists indoctrinating children in the UK. But a lot of British Muslims voted for the Labour Party. So a lot of those very politically active extremists lobbied the Labour Party to basically render those anti-extremism efforts toothless. And those got redirected into going after the enemies of the Labour Party than the original target, which was Islamic extremists.
Kind of like what you're seeing right now with a lot of the post 9/11 permissions given to the United States government to, and I'm not saying it's good at all, but to be more focused on Islamic terror, to be more focused on things coming across the border in the Middle East, and then a little more post-Trump, all of that gets diverted to MAGA. Suddenly we're looking at MAGA and right-wing extremists, and the whole time we're focusing on right-wing extremism, which does exist. We're not focusing on border crisis or facilitated human trafficking or shooters or anything like that. The systems that this was like, it was originally designed to prevent these types of things, now seems to be focused more so on average Americans.
Yeah. The people created a weapon to go and protect themselves from Islamic extremists, and it got turned on them.
And that's an argument I was making since I was a kid. And I don't know whether the idea was planted in my head or not, but I grew up in a Christian family that was not too fond of the Muslims given what was going on in the Middle East. And my thought, even as a kid, I was just like, so what's to prevent them from doing this to Christians? Because in my head, I'm like, okay, so this is possible for a religion. Never knew that was possible, that you could just have all these powers to turn on someone based on their religion or their nationality. So what now prevents that from happening to you? I at least had that much understanding, and people around me were like, "You're just a kid. You don't get it. It's going to be fine." And I would say pretty staunch on that growing up, and now I'm kind of glad I did, because I'm like, all right, well, yeah, now we're going after white Christians. Now there's spies in the churches. Like, okay, like, oh my god.
And to be fair, white Christian was a euphemism used by the Klan back in the South and into the 1990s. So I can guess that some people who spent all their time studying domestic terrorism in the form of the Klan might think this is just another iteration of the same thing. The way you see mothers concerned about some really creepy stuff in sex education classes being compared to those white women's councils or something in the 50s.
White
So
women's councils.
they interpret modern political developments as if it was the 1950s South.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe because they haven't heard about any other kind of extremism or terrible ideologies.
Yeah, everyone wants to live in a time machine. It's like, we can't put forth this policy because if we put forth this conservative policy, that means we go back in time 50 years. Or when we go out and protest, we have to pretend like we're existing 50 years ago. Like, no one's ever rooted in their period of time anymore. Nobody can ever see that we're just living in 2024. We were living in 2020, and that things weren't the past, things weren't the future, things were the current moment, and that if we just adjusted for the current moment, then we can build a better future and avoid the atrocities of the past. Like, the conservatives can't have anything to say on abortion because bringing up a late term 9-month abortion, well, if we give attention to that, well, then we're just going to go back to the 30s. Whereas it's like, no, maybe if you want to have a stronger system of abortion, if that's what you're going for, then maybe you could at least try to recognize these certain things or recognize the atrocities that they're coming to you with, because it turns out they were doing a lot of horrible shit to babies and fetuses. And, in turn, like with COVID, one of the COVID vaccines made with fetal cells, like a lot of people weren't about that. But meanwhile, there were Christians who were forced to take it. It's like there's a lot of nuanced discussions that could have been had if both sides of the aisle had just been willing to hear each other's side out. You know,
I mean,
it just makes me sad.
one of the observations about a lot of totalitarian ideologies is that uh, Nazism often claimed to hark back to a imagined past and a utopian future, but really didn't talk a lot about what things were like in that day. Fascism in Italy, the glorious Roman past, Italian futurism, the Soviet Union talked about, oh, how bad the czars were, and this glorious imagined future, which never really talked about the current present. So there seems to be the unmooring from the present seems to have been a feature of a lot of these totalitarian ideologies.
Yeah, and it's kind of like you're just saying with NATO and everything happening with Russia. It's a good way to distract from what's happening at home. Ugh. Goddamn.
And I'm
Yeah, and
not saying there isn't a need for the future. I love science fiction and and the history does matter, but you should study what actually happened and not and because this bad thing happened in the past, therefore this is good.
yeah, yeah. I think a lot of what our society deals with too is Americans are really good at justifying their bullshit, no matter what that bullshit is, be it addiction or politics or really anything. We're just really great at justifying bullshit because we can find an excuse for anything. Because and that's it's a downside to be sure, but it's also like the benefit of being in America is we have so much information, we have so many different ideas, but the fact that people want to gravitate to the bad ideas that justify their bad behavior and nothing to the contrary. It's why so many people hate Jordan Peterson. It's because they're gonna sit there and they're gonna sift and they're gonna try to find the Nazi material, but all they're gonna hear about is responsibility and don't be hateful and don't be an asshole. And it's just gonna piss them off, piss them off, piss them off till eventually they leave and they just post about how he's a Nazi and they don't absorb any of the message. They didn't want to hear any of that shit. Jordan Peterson's just a Nazi, and we're gonna leave on that assumption because we don't need to hear any of this crap from a boomer about responsibility. Like, it's sad.
Okay, I mean, because when the Soviet Union was being built, they had to train people to actually do things like make the trains run, how to get food delivered to the cities, how to how to actually try to investigate a crime rather than just round people up and shoot them. They had to get people to stand up and do more than just beat people up for money. So that took training them to be responsible and kind of trustworthy and all that. And I mean, that's what those party schools were about in the 1920s and 30s. It wasn't just propaganda, it was also trying to build up the skills and mindset to actually run something.
Maybe that's a positive, and that just goes to show that what we're living through isn't sustainable
I
because
don't
there's
think
no rigor to any of this. There's no strategy. It's flailing toddlers is what it is.
so. When people in Antifa heard about Jordan Peterson, did they think he was a not? Did they really think he was a Nazi, or was that just an epithet and people ignored him, or what?
Oh, for Jordan Peterson?
Yeah,
Oh yeah, people hate Jordan Peterson. I mean, just look at what did you see the whole Marvel Comics debacle with the Red Skull?
yeah,
Yeah, I mean that's kind of like the extent. Like that person was, well, I think that person was actually a professor at one point who did that. But
yeah.
Yeah, like that's Jordan Peterson is kind of like Andy No. Like people see him as like top Nazi. Like Jordan Peterson is a far right figure that encourages men to lean into extremism, and I believed it too. And just because I had never like listened to any of his stuff, I was just like, well, if they're all saying that he's a Nazi, he's a Nazi. So he was one of the first people I went to after leaving Antifa because I'm like, okay, well, I need to understand the other side to this. I need to get a little deeper. Like, what's happening here? Let's go listen to this guy. And goddamn, if I haven't listened to him almost every day since, like, dude is the pinnacle of anti-fascism. And if these kids would just realize that and listen to the man, for Christ's sake, they might walk away and be like, oh, we can make something better of ourselves. Wouldn't that be something? But instead, they'd rather treat him like he's Hitler. And I think it's because he has an effect of he has people leaving extremism. He has people leaving the left. So people at the top are probably leading a lot of anti-Jordan Peterson campaigns because they know, holy shit, we are going to lose followers and we're going to lose support if they listen to this man. This man is dangerous. And I mean, they've even engaged in election interference on his channel. They pulled his RFK interview because now the presidential candidates are going to podcast and now the corporations are in bed with the government. So YouTube's like, oh no, we can't have that.
I mean,
Because they know. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I saw that Daryl Davis posted that Antifa was protesting him.
I want to talk to him. I wonder if I could possibly get in touch because he's definitely one of my heroes. Whenever I heard that, I was like, what the hell? He even said that they were worse than the KKK in some instances. That's a statement coming from a guy who hangs out with them behind the scenes.
I believe it. There's a quiet reputation that white liberals are more racist than any Confederate flag waving, the South shall rise again kind of person.
Yeah, and the reality for that is like because most of those people have to do it in secret. Unless you're in a small town community where that's accepted at least by the people around you, you can't do that openly. You can go be as racist and ravenous as you want publicly, post it to TikTok, burn down a building while screaming kill all the white people, and you have society's permission. That's the only difference here. You know, if society gave permission to the KKK and the Confederate soldiers to do that, then yeah, we'd probably be seeing about the same thing on the other side. And that's what Antifa thinks is happening when the little drips of it get through and they see a couple people come through with the swastika or Nazi flag. But really, they are just kind of fighting what they want to fight or becoming what they want to fight.
I mean, I assume you've heard the old Nietzsche quote, uh, about he who stares into the abyss looks into him. He who fights monsters may become a monster. I'm butchering the quote, but
yeah, no, it's completely right. Like a lot of these people are just they're finding monsters everywhere. Tucker Carlson's a monster. Joe Rogan's a monster. You know, the guy at the Road to the Punisher tattoo's a monster. Donald Trump's a monster. You know, Putin's a monster. All these people are monsters. And meanwhile, they're just absorbing all this hatred and just superpowering themselves with bullshit and anger. And just, it just becomes so vile.
But
like,
do people realize that hatred eventually destroys you?
not when you're blind to it and not when you're consuming historically speaking, this generation probably consumes record amounts of alcohol and drugs, like unseen or heard of. Like I can't think of any other period of time where you could go get ketamine or LSD or shrooms or cocaine or fentanyl or alcohol or booze, beer, malt liquor. You can get anything. And not only can you get anything, you can get anything through Snapchat and Discord. Like, I literally asked a guy here if I could get some mushrooms, right? Because mushrooms are legal here, so it's no big deal. So I was like, hey, do you know a guy who's selling mushrooms that can maybe hook me up? He's like, yeah, bro, check out my Discord. And he shows me a menu. So, like, this shit is on demand now. Historically speaking, there's probably never been a generation so intoxicated as the American youth right now.
Oh, God.
So that's plaguing a lot of decision making. Like it's really, really bad. And not only that, now they're all addicted, but now it's all fentanyl. So like I've known people here who are still actively using cocaine, and I'm like, dude, you need to test that shit before you do it. And they're like, man, if I fucking die, I die. You only live once, right? And it's like, yeah, no, your little bullshit positive nihilistic spin isn't fucking cute. It's dangerous, and I don't want to see you die. But they don't give a shit because live every day like it's your last. And that is majority of the people that live in Eugene and Springfield, as far as like 20 to 30 year olds.
Fuck.
It's bad, dude. And a lot of these are coming from blue communities. Like, I feel like drug legalization, that should have been a national effort and we should have all acted collectively. But when you have areas like Oregon and Washington, California being the only ones, well, we just absorbed all of the drug users. We absorbed everybody who just wanted to come out and do this openly. So now it's just a part of the culture to where most people are on meth or fentanyl, or like even when I was back in my drug days, I knew that I could do it. So I would be out drunk as shit, coked out, tripping on LSD in the middle of the fucking Walmart with the walls melting, thinking I'm in fucking heaven. Sometimes thinking I was in fucking hell. I had some of the worst bad trips you've ever fucking imagined in public with people acting like it's normal. It's it's like not only normalized, it's encouraged because like that's how you get in. You know, all the kids are getting high together. We're all hanging out in a dark room watching movies. Like,
I mean,
it makes sense, right?
I mean, one of the notorious things about the Nazis were that so many of them were high on fucking meth.
hmm And you see it everywhere else in American society too. Like all the women are on SSRIs, all the men are getting testosterone treatments and everything under the sun. Like we are living in an oil snakeman salesman's wet dream. Like the little old man that was going around selling you bullshit in the Wild Wild West days, his future came true. We live in it. Like everyone is just poisoning themselves and intoxicating themselves. Like, but the fact that it wasn't a national effort means that it all went to the blue cities. It all went to the blue states. So whenever I talk with people down in Texas, they can't believe the shit that I'm telling them. And then when I go down to visit, like I said, I've only visited my family in Texas in the last 8 years, like 2 or 3 times. Every single time I walk down there, or go down there, talk about a time machine. Like it's like I'm a kid again, and there's like no drugs and no violence and no craziness, and there's more people and the drivers are shittier than ever. But past that, like it ain't this, and this just gets worse and worse and worse, and people are like, it's fine.
I mean, here in DC, a number of drugs were legalized. Mushrooms were legalized a few years ago, but I don't see anywhere near the same degree of whacked out behavior that I've seen on the news about the West Coast.
Yeah, and I will say they went against the or they or recriminalized it. So like I have been seeing a lot less use out in the streets, but that doesn't mean I'm seeing less high people. That doesn't mean I'm seeing less people intoxicated. They're just doing it inside now. So it's like the damage has already been done. Nobody's going back on their addictions because Oregon decided to walk back. Like people are locked in, and there's so much here ready to facilitate that. And not to mention, now that things are illegal again, we have cartel all over the West Coast.
Oh shit!
Chinese cartel, Mexican cartel, they're the ones operating the farms. Like they're not running these farms to grow carrots. Like they're doing it for drugs.
I mean, I told some of my classmates that most of the grow operations in Colorado after legalization were cartel controlled. That just because you make growing something previously illegal doesn't mean the operations are still all going to be legal. You just make it impossible to tell what's legal and what isn't.
And like I used to think I had answers for how to solve the drug war. Clearly I don't. I think it's very complex, but
Well, go look
Oregon
at the
did not
history
handle
of
this shit well.
go look at the history of vodka and Russians. Taxes raised for addiction treatment programs don't always go to addiction treatment programs. And at the end of the Tsarist era, most government revenue came from vodka taxes. At the end of the Soviet Union, most government revenue came from vodka taxes.
Jesus. If that ain't the most Russian shit though. That is that's wild.
Well, getting the population addicted so you can tax them is not necessarily the best thing for a civilization.
No, and didn't Japan do something similar during COVID? Wasn't it like they increased their advertising, or they were basically trying to encourage people to keep drinking more alcohol? That way, the alcohol stocks wouldn't plummet or something like that. I think it was something along those lines.
I'm not familiar with that.
I'm gonna pull it up and I'll link it. I'll link it in the description of this if I can find it. But I think it was somewhere along those lines where they're like, "Oh, people are drinking less. This is a problem."
Oh, I mean, one of the problems with COVID was you just started to see alcoholism skyrocket because when people can't be with friends, they lose their emotional outlets, and some people turn to alcohol as a coping mechanism. For others, friends are a moderating influence on addiction. So
Yeah, and it's yeah, I
there,
eh, the damage afterwards too. Like I've realized like putting down drinking, my mind isn't the same as before I started drinking. Like there's damage done. There's things done to your brain that are different, and I think a lot of people don't know how to deal with the damage from the drugs and the alcohol. So to them, their brain is just fried and they just don't know what to do. And I see that a lot because there are a lot of people who are walking away from it, but you realize that your psyche's different because like this isn't your granddaddy's getting sober. For a lot of these kids, it's not just putting down the bottle. It's putting down the bottle and the pills, the cocaine and the psychedelics, and maybe even some of the self-harming, food, whatever your addiction is or whatever your outlet is. Like a lot of these people, you can't even just put it all down at once. You got to do bit by bit by bit. So a lot of times when people in my generation are trying to quit, it's like I have to quit the drinking, but I can't drink the cocaine, or I can't quit the cocaine, or vice versa. Or I'll start with the acid, but I still need the pills to get me through the pain, and then always definitely keep the weed. Weed's always the last to go, if at all. And for me, I realized I couldn't get rid of that. But
my God.
it's a predicament for so many people because I said, it's not just one addiction. You don't just do cocaine and then drink all the time and then have one addiction. That's two addictions you have to tackle now. And now it's like taste the rainbow, try every drug on the planet, have a fucking fistful of Molly and scoop fucking parts of your brain out. Let's go. It'll make the song better. It'll make the bass bump. Like, at what cost?
I and there's a strong relationship uh, between a dysfunctional society and addiction. And so in 1984, Victory Gin was an aspect of the totalitarian society. But in Nazi Germany, you could, for a while, you could smell a German offensive because you could smell schnapps in the air. The German soldiers were drinking before going into battle. You could tell when the Soviet offensive was about to happen because Soviet soldiers were drinking vodka. And during the 80s, communist governments loved to brag about, oh, in the West, here's this exploding drug addiction, which they partially helped by funneling supplies to the drug dealers, but that's a whole nother story.
Misinformation, Cyprian. Misinformation.
Uh, that's a major part of North Korea's budget.
Jeez.
But you end up with a situation where the communist countries were bragging about how people in the West were using drugs, and the people in the East were just trying to drown their sorrows in alcohol. And now we've kind of got the worst of both worlds.
Yeah. One thing I've learned is you can be depressed as hell at your lowest point in life, but you can still turn the world into rainbows. And that I think that helps add to a lot of this cognitive dissonance we're seeing. Is like I've had a lot of addictions in waves. What happened before Antifa? Psychedelic abuse. Years of psychedelic abuse, talking to the devil, seeing God, talking in tongues, shadows coming out of the wall to grab me, going to hell, perceiving time differently. I went to the hospital once after getting into the more I talk to people, the more they think it was angel dust. I thought it was a purple LSD tab. But after thinking I died and went to hell and spent about 7 or 8 hours in that experience in a vortex of demons and imps grabbing my throat and pulling out my hair, but my hair never coming out, just eternally pulling my hair. So just imagine threads of your head just never stopping while an imp chokes you. And going to the hospital, and everybody in my entire life that I had ever known from the point I was born was in my head on the other side of the hospital curtains, talking about how much of a disappointment I was and about how I had failed them. To where suddenly, even though I'm the only person I know in my circle who lives in Oregon, somehow everybody got onto a plane in the last few hours and is outside my hospital room and getting very specific with all of the letdowns and all the things I've done wrong in my life. That is one psychedelic horror story, of which I have many. Now, take my generation and most of the kids that live here in Oregon, we all have them. We have seen demons, we have communicated with angels, we have received psychedelic visions, we have heard voices, we have started speaking in tongues. You know, psychedelics aren't just about understanding the universe. When you're mixing in addiction and alcohol and all this negative frequency and energy into that, you're going to fucking hell in the most literal of senses. And there's a lot of people I know that were in Antifa that have had a lot of these experiences. And I really think that that helps lead to the cognitive dissonance. But then you also see that a lot of this woke bullshit is getting into the psychedelic field now, to where now you can have people who will be under these trips in controlled circumstances, but with these people getting into their head with political ideology.
Oh God.
And I think also, to get a little nuttier with it, what Alex Jones has been saying about them mapping out the DMT realm, I have had shared experiences, psychedelic experiences with people in the same room as me, to where our experiences have synced up completely. I don't think the psychedelic space is one that at the current moment is untapped by the government and the CIA. I think that they want access to the psychedelic sphere. They want access to these realms just as much as they want access to our dreams and our thoughts. And I think that that's a big reason that psychedelics play a huge part in what's happening in Oregon, because I feel like they've helped twist the perception. And a lot of this ideology, when you're constantly being fed these ideologies, but you're getting messages from God, you're getting messages from creation, from the universe, from these beings, whatever may have you, whatever experiences you're having, but then you're sobering it up and you're mixing it in with the political ideology, and you're mixing it up with the internet, and now you're letting that dictate what the message is supposed to be. That helps get into your head of utopian thinking and godlike status, and this being bigger than anything anybody else could possibly imagine, because they haven't seen the things that you've seen. They haven't seen the colors, they haven't smelt the smells. They're not willing to go on that journey like you were. So you must be doing the right thing. And there's people who will be having shitty day after shitty day after shitty day, but they'll have a mushroom trip and, oh, this is just the one thing I need to do better. And then they'll do it better for a few days. And then they go back to being that shitty person, but then they take the ego with them of, oh, I learned this big, important, mighty lesson. Aren't I better than you? Something I was very guilty of doing on multiple occasions. And that fuels the ego, and that helps build, it's one of the bricks in the wall that keeps you from seeing the other side. I think there's a lot of bricks.
God. I shudder to think what would happen if the totalitarian dictators of the past had access to brainwashing drugs. That's, my God.
We're all Charles Manson now.
I mean, we're not that far off from that now. I've got a bookshelf off camera there and a storage closet over there.
Oh, nice.
But one of the observations about, well, there were experiments with interrogation drugs in the 30s and 40s, but even when faced with the prospect of getting information about Nazi atrocities, the authorities in the Nuremberg trials decided against using drugs on prisoners. So it's kind of remarkable to me that people would do it on themselves.
it's like chasing a dragon too, because like so many of these trips are so different. But like even with having seen some of the darkness, I always wanted to go back. Just knowing that there's worlds beyond this world, like always taking interest with things like Star Wars or Silent Hill or Narnia, instances where there's a world just on the other side, and knowing that's attainable in your universe. Well, maybe if I could just go back this time, I can get it right. Maybe I can find what I'm looking for. And then you sober up and you realize, oh, I was just getting crazier and crazier and crazier. Like I said, there's points where I spoke in tongues. I would walk down the street. I remember once doing it for like 3 hours on end. Couldn't tell you why, but I was just like, I'm not even gonna do it because it sounds so wild. But like tongue flipping, like prayer tongue style. At sometimes I try to make it sound Russian. At other times I try to make it sound Mexican. And then I'd walk by someone and I just try to see how convincing I would be when doing it. Fried out of my goddamn mind. And these are just normal sights in Oregon. This is just things people do. But
They start to understand the power lines collapsing under the weight of a storm more and more.
yeah, everyone's fried. Everyone's fried. And it's like I always say, the people who aren't on drugs, they're on social media, which God help them with that one. At least I can get over that one. Like,
Oh my
ugh.
God.
Psychedelics, I think, are going to be a big part of the story moving forward, because I think the more people who speak out, I'm hoping to find other people who can resonate with that, because, like I said, so many people I can think of in Antifa that I knew, like, we were tripping together. We were talking about these things. What entity did you see? This is the entity that I saw. I mean, hell, shit, let me grab this for you. I'll save the story for a standalone video because I want to tell it in depth. But talking about conspiracies and reptiles, like, this is my entity. I keep it on my door. Here, let me have a. Oh, that's my camera.
Okay.
Reptilian, white hood, Joker paint. And this thing came to me during a mushroom trip after I had decided to leave Antifa. After I was like, this is insane. I don't know what to do. I saw it appear in a fractal in my shower, and it was in a white hood, and it had a long gray reptilian feature with Joker paint that was just kind of like melting off of it, and like there was no solid form of it. It was like reaching throughout space and time to communicate with me, and it was in a black room, and its tail was holding a stick with a mirror shard that was creating the fractal impression, and it was trying to confirm to me that I needed to walk away and that I needed to put down some of my bullshit. And I went crazy with trying to figure it out for a while, because there was even times where I was like, did I get communicated with by a reptile? Was this a reptilian alien? Was it underground? Was it on the moon? What is this? And ultimately, as time unfolded, I had another trip that actually connected to that trip. It was one of those instances where sometimes you can have two trips connect, I guess, and I felt the same thing and I saw the same colors, and it came back to me, and it was just like, no, I'm your creative conscious. And it went from a reptile to everything in my room and everything on me, my arms, smiles and eyes and teeth. And it just simply told me, it's like, if you don't do what you need to do, and if you don't accept God, I'm going to die, and you are going to die. And then
Do
it just kind of faded back out, and I was just like, okay.
do psychedelics make people more inclined to see intentionality behind random things?
Describe what you mean, because I feel like I can go off a couple of angles with that.
I mean, so there's a known psychological condition where people might incorrectly perceive that, say, a glass is a person. It has agency. It thinks. They would perceive an inanimate object as if it was animate.
Yes. Yeah, I'd
And
say that definitely happens. And it's like a message from the universe, and like only you're conscious of it, and it's a matter of vibration and dimensional space. Is that kind of what you're meaning? Or
that's
am I
some of it.
interrupting?
Yeah, that it's not just that it had that an inanimate object is animate, that there is intentionality behind it, but that it's very, very important. That effect is real?
Yeah, you want to see something wild? So in line with that trip, like I said, I'm gonna give it a even more in-depth explanation. And this one's a little trippier for me, and for some people, they could take that to mean really crazy shit. One of the things I saw before this reptile appeared was it was a swarm of fractals, and I was looking into my shower curtain, which had no reflection, and I was inside these jars with frogs, like bullfrog specimens. And there were points I could look in, and it was like I was a part of a speck of flesh that would flake off their body, and I could see between the ribs, and it would just kind of be going around and looking at these frogs through the jars. If you've ever seen the intro to Alien Resurrection, it was kind of like that. So like I'm in these jars looking at these distorted frogs and images, but I could also see people in white coats, it seemed like, on the other side, and shadows moving around. So about 3 weeks after this trip happened, right, my buddy Kellen, who I talk about sometimes on the podcast, wanted me to help them move into a new apartment. Somebody that they knew went to Portland, wound up going into a mental hospital, and was into a bunch of really crazy witchy shit. So I wound up getting this, something that she left behind. I found this making its way to me.
An old preserved frog?
Oh, yeah, bullfrog in a jar.
Okay.
So sometimes there's trippier instances like that, but then there's instances that I feel like I took it to where other people could take it to, where everything is a message from God, everything is a message from the universe, everything is geared directly, specifically at them. Every number has to mean something. So there's like trippier instances like that, and then there's like, oh, the world revolves around me, kind of becomes like main character syndrome, I think the kids will call it.
But hearing about that, that makes me think that one of the major things that turns rational suspicion into a conspiracy theory, a fake one, not a real conspiracy issue, is that people misperceive agency. So on average, men make more than women. Now, is that because of discrimination? Or is that because, well, men tend to go into higher risk fields than women? So if people perceive that there's more intentionality, they are going to be much more angry.
Mm-hmm.
If they perceive there's less intentionality, they'll be more passive.
Yeah, I feel like with psychedelics, I feel like in the beginning, the whole thing is like, you kind of shed your fear, you shed your paranoia. If it's done correctly, like you're open, you're free, nothing can come to hurt you right now. You're at one with yourself. You're right where you need to be on planet Earth. But it's with the continual drug use that I think you start to see a lot of that. The more scoops are getting taken out of your brain, the longer you've been away from reality, it starts to take its toll. And I think that's when you start to get a lot of the paranoia. It's like I said, whenever I see some of these stories now where people are like, dude was out in the park hunting reptiles before he killed himself or whatever, I could totally see myself being that guy, given that I honestly had to debate myself, was that a real reptilian entity that contacted me? Thankfully, with enough looking out and analysis, I came to an alternate conclusion. Also doesn't mean I don't believe there's not reptilian races. I do. Just going to throw that out there. But I'm not going to let that dictate all my other political discussions or anything. I could speculate and theorize, but I'm not going to let that drive what I think on something like transgender issues or global war or anything like that. Like, I could just speculate. But I can see how someone can get like potentially a vision like that and go ape shit. And I wonder if sometimes if the reptilian depiction comes to people of a certain mindset, because certain people see certain things under psychedelic visions in attune with their mentality. I think there's something about people with more of a conspiratorial way of thinking, or who are at the very least more open with certain ideas and are willing to receive certain ideas and think it a certain way, that encounter reptiles. Like Terrence McKenna has a whole bit on it about how he goes to the reptilian planet and where they live and what they're doing, and then he comes back from it. And I think that that's where you're starting to see a lot of the reptile crap get out of hand, is people are frying their brains. They think the reptiles are chasing them, and they're not interpreting their psychedelic visions properly. And they're mixing that in with, I mean, look, when you start to go into like David Icke and the reptilian agenda and all that, it can get pretty freaky. It's wild. But when you start mixing that with psychedelics and you start to think like that's, and it's not even to say it's not real. I actually believe a lot of what David Icke writes, but some people can take things a little too far for their own personal life, and they'll perceive demons that aren't there. So I do wonder if people are just receiving psychedelic visions of reptiles and going haywire with it. It's one of my
What I'm
theories.
hearing is that abuse of psychedelics, I mean, I've heard there are benefits to limited use, but excessive use seems like it's poised to create the kind of paranoia and lack of reality testing that would turn people into very dangerous radicals.
Yeah, and then at that point too, it's like, well, you put reality on the world. So I think a lot of these people too that find themselves in the trance space, whenever they're going through psychedelics, they're getting in the mind state of we're all one, we're all the same. There's no difference between humans. And when they come out of it, they're thinking that, but they're applying it in a very, very different way. But from them, that's a vision from God that you cannot argue with. Their God. But it's
Golly.
because you can't argue with the psychedelic space. Like you can't. There's no one alive on this planet who can sit here and tell me I did not see a reptile in a white hood with Joker paint. You can't tell me that because I've seen it. What you can tell me perhaps is that I've misinterpreted that, and have you thought about thinking of this another way? But a lot of people, when they're just going off on their tangents and what they believe, they're not really bringing that into it because they don't want to sound crazy. But if psychedelics are going to be a part of our everyday lives, well, we better buckle up because everybody's going to start seeing angels and demons, and shit's going to get really fucking weird. And a lot of people are going to make contact with aliens, and a lot of people are going to see reptiles, and a lot of people are going to see animal human hybrids. And it's all going to exist in this little world that only you and potentially the government one day can see.
And they don't have people around them to say, hey, you had a bad trip, man, don't take it too seriously.
No, there are people like that, and God bless those people for being around. The ones who call them the water fairies, they're like, here's some water, man. Here, eat some water, drink some water, eat this food. I know you don't want to. Eat this grilled cheese, man. It's going to be okay. But simultaneously, there's a lot of those people, too, who they know that kind of thing because they've been doing that kind of thing for a long time, or they're your dealers in a lot of those cases. So it's like, I don't know, the psychedelic realm is very, very difficult to interpret. And if you try to interpret it by yourself or with a group of kids, like you need people like Terrence McKenna and Joe Rogan and people who study this kind of thing and religion and all of these things. That's what you need to understand the psychedelic space, history, like the cool things in life. That's what you need to understand that. But if you're just taking it from memes and political ideology, then you're turning what should be one of the most meaningful experiences of your entire life into one of the worst decisions you could have possibly made for yourself.
Well, that's I'm reminded of a Farscape episode. Yeah, I know I'm going back to a science fiction thing,
I
but
just started that 2 days ago, finally.
okay. Basically, they encounter a space station inhabited by children, and the children have their own mythology about what these documents actually mean, but they're just completely different. Uh, they can't interpret what's going on because they never had anyone there to teach them what things actually were.
Yep. And, God bless the people in my life who I met here who did help me. I met one guy, his name is Larry. He helped start the cannabis churches up in Canada. Like, dude was a big figure, worked with some of the top weed growers in Oregon, is running his whole shebang right now. And he had a whole setup on his back porch, and he would just make like pound after pound of dab because it was legal. So he had a whole oil refinery set up on his back apartment. So he'd always have me come over and test it, and we'd just sit there and we'd talk about the universe, and we talk about God, and we talk about religion, and we talk about all these crazy things. And like the Antifa shit happened a couple years afterwards, but I think people like that really they really can leave an impression on you to where they just want you to do better and be better and to keep questioning and to just treat yourself right. And there, for all the bad, there's a lot of really good people like that in Oregon who, yeah, there's some people out there who they'll take acid day in and day out, but they can regulate it to the point where they're not going to go fucking batshit with it. But all these kids think that they can be that, and they see that and they're like, oh, I just want the drugs. It's like, okay, well, what do you know about that person's pain? What do you know about them that they had to overcome to where no drop of acid on the planet can ruin their fucking night? What tragedy did they see? You haven't seen that same tragedy. You start to realize that it's all about the human story and that people want to have these experiences without having the story. You know, they want to be a communist without having the struggle. They want to be black without ever having lived in the hood. They want to be trans without ever having felt gender dysphoria. Like,
They're just vague labels that they put on like clothes rather than really being something you are. It's
yeah.
it's like there's some defect in self-evaluation. So you talked about a guy who can use acid every day and he's still semi-functional.
Well, not really every day. You can't take acid every day, but you know, continuously. I've met a couple people like that. Or at least
Which
seemingly functional from the outside.
which suggests that there's at least something in them that helps them avoid just chasing after any hallucination.
Mhm.
Whereas you've got a lot of people who encounter an idea and they chase after it without any self-evaluation to see, is this realistic? Is this a good idea? Am I just fooling myself?
Yeah.
So it
It's the
seems
same.
like there's something within people that could have been keeping them from chasing unreality, but instead it's missing and they just chase unreality.
Mhm. And then the further and further you chase it, the less capable you are of being able to get back to that thing and figure out what you need to do. Because now that I'm sober, I'm like, holy shit, my physical health is out of whack. My mental health is out of whack. All these things are out of order, like things that in my body that I'm like, holy shit, I did not think that was anything, or I didn't think I had to think about that, or I'm only 27. Why am I having these problems now? Now that makes it really hard. Well, not hard. Things are still workable, but it makes it a little more difficult to get the things done that I need to get done in the sense of, well, now this shit's just going to cost more money. So now I got to work more. So now that I'm working more, now I have less time to work on this project. Now I have to sacrifice and move things around a little bit. And it could have been a lot simpler had I not fucked with my head. And it's not to say like that I regret every incident, but I didn't need to be out on the streets looking for drugs every day. Because when I didn't have acid, I had pills. And when I didn't have pills, I had mushrooms. And every single day, I drank about 3 to 4 oldies. And before that, I was on about a half gallon of whiskey every day. Cheap shit, if not Jack Daniels, when I wanted to treat myself. Every day, from the time I woke up to my morning shit to my fucking evening shower. Like, that was just life. And now there's things that I have to pay for. A lot of things. And for a lot of people, I think that's just overwhelming. And that, I know it's hard to talk about because I think a lot of people don't want to blame the drugs because so many people in my generation want to act like it's fine or it's normal or how we need to quit being squares. And, but it's
I
like,
mean,
no, we need to sober the fuck up.
this isn't the first time there was a major drug culture among young people. Um, some of the stories from the 60s. Have you heard of Philip K. Dick?
I know the name, but I'm not familiar of who he
He
is.
wrote The Man in the High Castle. Uh, he
Oh,
wrote
okay. Yeah, no, that's why I've been watching that.
he wrote the book that Blade Runner was based off of, but he also wrote a book in a Scanner Darkly, and in part it was inspired because, well, when he and his wife split up, he let a lot of young druggies into his house just to have someone there. And he saw a bunch of people basically die or be permanently disabled from it.
Jesus.
And he wrote the book In a Scanner Darkly about addiction and the corruption of the addiction industry.
And it's scary too, because when you're saying that, that's a really common thing around here. Because a lot of these kids are like runaways or party kids or just don't want to be home or ditching school, and it's perfectly fine and normal, acceptable here. There are adults here that want to be the cool adults that welcome kids into their homes and let
Welcome.
them be the place for them to do the drugs and do the drinking. And it leaves these kids in a very, very vulnerable position. Yeah. Yeah. Welcome. Please come on in. Like how Jeffrey Marsh welcomes in all the kids. It's like, yes, please.
Oh
But it's
God.
so common here for there to be like that type of adult figure in not only one child's life, but like a group of children. And to be sure, there's occasionally that adult person who is like really like the protector of the community, takes care of the homeless kids, makes sure they have a meal to eat, makes sure they have a place to go. But there's a lot of instances where they're just fueling drugs in these kids' fucking throats and taking advantage. And as a result, I don't know one girl in this fucking town who has not been raped or molested or knocked out with fucking drugs. Like, and I know a lot of women. I'm a gay guy. Most of the people I've been around are women. And it's like, don't want to blame them, but at the same time, like, there's, well, not at the same time, there's no blaming here, but this generation's ability to detect predators or to see warning signs of this type of behavior, it's just null and void at this point. So they just kind of walk themselves into it. It's just like you see all these high school kids here that, I'm sorry, they're dressed like sluts. I live right across, or, well, I'm not gonna say where I live, but I live close to a high school around here, and these kids are walking out of the school dressed like little hoes. Skimpy skirts, fucking shirts up to here, walking out like they're freaking 30-year-olds going out to the club. And I'm like, where are your parents? Like, this is disturbing. And meanwhile, knowing that this is a community where kids are getting raped all the time, to where there was actually a protest a couple months ago with girls from the school being like, oh my God, sexual assault awareness, kids are getting sexually assaulted at the school. And it's like, yeah, I'm sorry, but no shit. Look at how you're dressed. I'm sorry to be the one to say it. Look at how you're dressed. You can't keep sending your kids to school dressed like prostitutes and not expect some pervert around here to deal with that, because there's people who've been caught around this high school creeping, grown adults, tweakers, men with tattoos, bats, muscly, like people who would take advantage of little girls. But we don't want to fucking slut shame. We don't want to fucking talk bad about anybody's clothing. We want freedom of expression, right? Fuck that. Fuck that. But it's what it is. And the parents are into it. The parents allow it. That's why they let them leave like that. Because they don't want to contradict their kids. They don't want their kids to be a runaway. And that might actually be a more virtuous thing in the parents' case, because they're like, holy shit, if you run away, you're going to go out there with some drug using pedophile, just like the rest of them. So it's like either that or let you live here and dress like a slut. Parents need to learn to parent. I'll be damned if I ever let my kids do this shit.
Uh, no, I mean, it feels like adults. It isn't just your generation that's lost the ability to detect predators. It's your parents.
Because they didn't want to be like their parents. You know,
And were
that's the
their
difference.
parents the ones who went through the '60s and saw the nasty sides of the subcultures?
I think a big problem is parents aren't sharing their history with their kids, because I think so many kids are so snippy with history that if any adult were to try and tell them about their upbringing, it would just be dismissed. But, you know, that's one thing my mom's always been really good about. She's told me about her life growing up. You know, that's one thing that parents and people in these families really, really need to do for these kids. Like, I think a lot of it is because they don't want the historical comparisons of their day to be brought up with the modern day. Be like, oh, I know if I mention abortion in the 1970s that my kid's going to go off and think this. So therefore, they'd rather just keep it quiet and go on about their day. But at that point, what's that kid learning? Again, what they're teaching that kid at the school. That's it.
The political shame means that the nuance from actual life gets shut down. So parents don't share with their kids, so the added layer of nuance gets forgotten.
Fascism starts in the home. Like it's all like seeing how it operates in the home now. It's starting to make sense. It's like the self-censorship, the we're not gonna go there, we're not gonna discuss that. Like, oh, there's like 1940s, like, oh, there's Jews burning, that smoke from the chimney over there is what? We're not gonna talk about that. How was your day today, sweetie? Have some dinner. Like, like the kids today, what? They're W path, what? Not gonna talk about that. Have some dinner. Or rather, have your cell phone.
I there's There is a movie titled Goodbye Lenin, produced in Germany in the 2000s, and it is about a boy who tries to preserve kind of the illusion that communism was still there for his mother, who was supposedly a very determined party fanatic. The family dynamics, the lying, the secrecy, the illusion, the sense of unreality, very much replicated what happened under communism.
Jeez. And I'm sorry you cut out for a minute there. You said she was mentally unwell, so they're like trying to maintain the delusion. Is that what I heard?
The premise of the story is that a mother who was a Communist Party fanatic activist would die if she had a big psychological shock. Days later, the Berlin
Oh.
Wall falls, the communist government in East Germany is dissolved, and to keep her alive, her son decides to put on the pretense that communism was still around. So it becomes a kind of a display of increasing unreality as the kid tries to hide all these social changes.
Wow. Okay, I gotta see that.
It's
Jesus
a
Christ.
it's presented as a slapdash comedy, but if you've been through those dynamics, you start to see the glaring similarities.
God damn, that's wild. Yeah, I'm gonna have to check that one out. I feel like you have so many good references. Like I'm just having like a whole list that I'm like, okay, gotta watch this, watch this, watch this.
There's a,
Hey, oh, sorry, go ahead, go ahead.
there's a lot of people poured their hearts out into movies and film and literature after major events. And that became pop culture. Uh, and why do people find so much wisdom in Harry Potter? Well, it's because a lot of the themes that were common at the time that J.K. Rowling was writing were common in the literature she was encountering when she was younger. Because that was the traumatized writings of people trying to work their way through these emotional topics. There was a lot of insights in the past that you can get just from the stuff people who survived it putting out as pop culture.
Absolutely. My mother, she's actually an English teacher, and she's been asking for my help on it. She's doing summer school, but rather than keeping the kids in the room kind of like a prison, they're trying to make it more like summer camp. But they let her work with a theme this year, and the theme she wanted to do was graphic novels and comic books. And she was reading all these studies about how kids benefited from that and what they went on to do. And so I've just been back and forth and heard all this like interviews with Jack Kirby and Stan Lee and Joseph Campbell and mythology, and like it's just so cool to like know like the stories of Marvel, for example, how much of that and DC and all these were based on like the Bible. How Stan Lee was just like, well, as time goes on, God and all these stories and these mythologies, they have to go somewhere. Why not here? Why not preserve them and put them into our literature in their own right? And yeah, literature, pop culture, comics, books, movies. I think they're going to be one of the things that help save us.
I
I
think
really
so as
do.
well. And On on the theme of comic books as literature, Asterix and Obelix. Have you heard of them?
I have not.
Okay, they're real big in Europe, but it's a French-Belgian series, but basically focused on France. And while the setting is ancient Rome, after the conquest of France, it's basically a commentary on modern French and European life. So you see all those little social conflicts of the time, like the rise of feminism, or the construction of subsidized apartment blocks and the like. Those are topics discussed using an imagined past as a way to avoid kind of the rawness of the political tension of the present. So American
As a way
comic
to what? Sorry, you cut out a little bit at the end there.
uh, the authors used ancient Rome and comedy as a way to kind of distance people from the rawness of the political tension of the present.
That
So,
makes sense.
and using the comic book form allowed it to be kind of simpler and more appealing than just another boring book published by some wannabe philosopher.
Kind of similar to what George Lucas did with a lot of what he's talking about in Vietnam and World War II. It's just like, okay, we're going to put this in the future. That way we're thinking about future and lasers and all that, and you could still absorb the message without necessarily having to get into the nitty gritty of the Empire actually being Nazis.
Yeah.
I just love that. And I feel like we're blessed with so many geniuses on this planet who are capable of just creating and putting that out there that I don't know. It sucks to see him being attacked, but it's like I say with J.K. Rowling, they're not attacking her because of what she said about gender. They're attacking her because of what she said about the schools. Like all
She
these
won't
creatives. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
she won't bend the knee. You had
Mm-mm.
a lot of situations where it was just, I agree with you on almost everything, but this one point. But
And
you're an
God forbid.
independent thinker. We can't control you. We can't keep our little ideological bubble. Therefore, you're dangerous because you're so much like us. We would be tempted to be individuals.
It's such a silly revolution they're waging against her. It's just like grow up. This is a woman with a life and a child and a job, and she has a house and a garden probably, and maybe even a cat or a dog, and she makes breakfast and shits like the rest of us and goes on about her day. It's just like people worship the people they attack. Like Donald Trump. Even if people hate Donald Trump, they worship Donald Trump because you're putting all of your time and intention and energy and frequencies into this one being. Like the people who hate J.K. Rowling really hate J.K. Rowling. Like there's a very targeted, specific interest there because they worship her. It's just a different kind of worship. It's like an anti-worship.
Um, there's some weird need for figures of hate. I mean, one way ideology has been described as internalizing versus externalizing. So one of the things that made the Balkans so unpleasant for a long time was I identify a lot of horrible things, but I project them onto my neighbor. It's externalizing rather than I identify a lot of horrible things about the world and I'm the one at fault. It's what made the Balkans violent and Scottish people very depressing to be around. Those things have waned.
And I don't think what a
Thankfully.
lot of people yeah. I just feel like in the modern day, people don't realize too, like in my case is a pretty extreme example. If you could just own up to your bullshit and let other people know, hey, this may have been because of me or because of something I did or something I was a part of. Most people are willing to accept that and say something like, thank you for speaking out. Good to see you on the other side. Really, really kind things but I think people expect there to be a really bad backlash with a lot of things. And for some people, there may be bigger backlashes than me, and they may be deserved. But like, I don't know. People don't need to keep themselves in that externalizing space. You can really just look at yourself and be like, I fucked that up, and people aren't gonna hate you for it. They might actually respect you a little more for it. Like, which is weird, but it's kind of true. But a lot of people right now, it's like they have to externalize trans genocide. Well, that's happening on the right. It's like, really, the right is the one sterilizing gender dysphoric, autistic, and lesbian children, huh? The right is the one putting them at higher suicide risk, huh? The right is the one doing all this shit, huh? Because the right is just so invested in fucking trans issues. Like, they only ever got invested whenever this shit started happening. Like,
Well, is it that some people need to blame someone else in order to feel like they are a remotely worthwhile person? If my opponent is Hitler, I can live with the horrible things I've done. And some people just can't seem to make the leap to, my opponent isn't Hitler and I can do better than what I used to do. There seems to be a lack of faith in self-evaluation and hope for the future.
100%. And I think too, I think that especially in my generation, but a lot of the American consciousness, suicidality has been bored into our brains. Like, we are taught to think like we're depressed, we're worthless, we're anxious, we're scared. And for a lot of people, that leads to suicidality and suicidal thoughts. I think for a lot of people, really wishing death on these types of people, just having the thought patterns that they do, for them to go back on that thought would literally mean for themselves, oh, that means that I would have to kill myself because I've been telling them they should fucking kill themselves. Like, there does seem to be like some sort of mortality thing behind this, to where if you have a whole generation of people believing that they're just depressed, worthless sacks of trash blowing in the wind, and they're alone on this ball of dust, and if they don't accomplish their dreams, then they'll wind up on the streets, or they just should kill themselves, then admitting you're wrong would be very existential for you if those are the types of unhealthy thought patterns you're having, I would imagine.
Are they
Because it really
unable?
would be, holy shit, if I am that type of person, or if I really did.
Do they have no faith in building something better? I mean, it's not my grand hope, but it's still good, and I've still done something good with my life.
It's easier to burn than it is to build. Hope somebody else will come and build it up for you. Make a mess, mommy will clean it up.
Why? God, these people seem even more hopeless than I am.
It's just like, people want to call me nihilist sometimes and be like, you're really dark. And I'm like, I'm not as dark as you think. It gets a lot worse. Like, I at least like to make fun out of life. Like, I'm not going to pretend like I haven't had suicidal thoughts occasionally. This is a hard world to live in. The other day, I'm just trying to take a shit and I'm seeing them uncover 300 bodies from a fucking mass grave in Palestine. Like, things just get thrown in your face constantly without you even fucking asking for it. And sometimes a bullet to the head sounds like it'd be a lot easier. But I could also try throwing myself at the world first and doing something. And instead of taking myself out, get a little cocky. Maybe run my mouth against the government a little bit more. See where that takes me. Try to create a podcast. Try to make a list. Like, just throw myself at the world rather than sitting in this hopeless space of, well, it's either this or death. I either numb the pain away or I die. Like, there's no sense of adventure. People got to get that adventure back. That's why I feel like if people in Antifa could wake themselves up, they're going to realize, holy shit, I still have more fight in me. I still have more to do. Like, this doesn't mean I have to back off and stop caring about the things that I care about. This means that I can actually come back harder and with a sense of purpose and maybe a more unifying sense of direction that can humble me and drive me forward. That's because that's kind of what I'm feeling right now. And I'm wondering, I'm like, how many other kids can we get to feeling like this, being like, okay, I'm back in the fight. Try not to fuck it up this time, but I'm back in the fight, and let's do it right and call for accountability and not destruction. I don't want Biden dead. I may like music that talks about Biden dying. I don't want Biden dead. I want Biden in jail. I want them all in jail. Everybody responsible for this nightmare, thorough investigations. I say Nuremberg 2.0, and I say it shouldn't even just be in the United States of America. I feel like it should be global. People on the right and the left who have been involved in this, right down to the World Economic Forum. But these kids need a sense of adventure. I'm on an adventure right now. It could end in fire and flames and tragedy. Who knows? But it's better than wanting to kill myself. Gotta say. Gotta say. And it's more fulfilling.
I think you have hope. And I think you had hope for something more, which is why you tried talking to people, not just beating them. And if I suppose that if someone does not have hope in the future, you might grasp some temporary sense of power by beating people, but that's only going to prolong the inevitable sense of powerlessness. So maybe some of this is just you still got hope and they don't. Maybe you see something they don't.
And I don't think that means that they're incapable of seeing it. So I think if more people speak out, like I said, not even on the Antifa front, it could be with Nazis or jihadists or doctors or teachers. Everybody's getting fucked over right now. Everybody's at a civil war. I mean, I even see it in the Star Wars community sometimes. Sometimes there's someone on one side that reaches across the aisle, and then you see a moment of like pause in the war, and it's like there's been a ceasefire between the Disney and the Legends fans. And you're just like, God damn. And it's been happening a lot more lately, which is really nice, to where it's like, everybody, whatever your community is, whatever your niche is, wherever you're at in life, just, I think we have to voice our concerns. It's mostly an issue of feeling alone and isolated. And podcasts are really going to help that. I feel like podcasts are just as revolutionary as books or film. I think that they're their own special thing in their own right, and they're going to go a very, very long way.
I think you're right about that. You get a certain kind of emotional reaction when reading a book, but it's not very visual. You've got some people who form a stronger connection with film, but that also requires a certain kind of attention, and it's very static. Whereas a podcaster, you get lots more content, lots more unscripted reactions. You get a kind of a deeper sense for a person's personality, not just what you're immediately seeing.
Yeah.
And that really seems to be, people are referring to Jordan Peterson or they're referring to Joe Rogan, not just, here's something he wrote, not just here's an episode, but they're referring to them as ideas, not just the individual thing that they did.
Mm-hmm. And it's amazing. And just watching the ripple effect, because like now it feels like there's just so many small fish, but like the small fish have such like a voice and a platform. But it is scaring me now because YouTube said they've shadow banned hundreds of my comments. They're not allowing me to communicate or reach out with people. They're going after a lot of podcasts really hard. Tim Pool, I think his 2 most popular videos ever just got completely wiped. They're going after other channels too. YouTube does not like me talking about what I'm talking about, and it's making that very clear. And the numbers and the resistance I'm fighting. I have spent about $30 in super chats this week trying to reach out to places like Gothics and Tim Pool. My messages will be deleted. It will take my money. It took $10 from me, and I wasn't allowed to say, hey, Tim Pool, we should talk. It deleted a whole 2-sentence thing that I typed out and took my money from me.
Do you, were you mentioning Antifa in it? Because I know YouTube bans certain keywords.
I use all the keywords. I will say I don't. Well, I've been playing in the comments, so I'm not allowed to say I'm in Antifa, extremist, former member, stuff like that. I can type it out and space it. But the problem is that sometimes the messages will come back after they've deleted. So I'll have 2 or 3 out of 5 that I posted that got deleted that'll come back. So you'll have those. And then you have me typing out and things are spaced and capitalized and looking all weird. And it looks like a drug addict is on your fucking feed, like trying to be like, look at me, look at me, look at me. And I feel like a lunatic when I'm doing it, but I'm like really trying to flag these people for like for Gothics, I can't really find her email. So I was like, okay, well, I can reach out to her in the chat. And then all the moments where I almost get the message through, it's like she happens to look away or something. And then I'm like, fuck. And it's just like I'm battling literally day in and day out with the algorithm. It's just like you will not speak. Community tabs, it tends to go against me a little bit more. It's usually in the direct comment sections and the live chats.
Have you heard of Benjamin Boyce?
Oh yeah. Yeah, I did an interview with, I think, Julie Belling or Carrie Marcel. They said that he wanted to talk with me, and I was expecting an email back, but I guess I should probably try to email him because it's been a few weeks. But yeah, we'll hopefully be talking in the near future.
Okay. Leslie Elliott Boyce or Benjamin Boyce seem like two good people to contact.
I love that they wound up like finding each other. That just happened one day. I saw that and I was just like, oh. But yeah, I'm definitely going to be reaching out to them because Radical Center was a good one for me. I feel like the last year or two, finding that a lot of really good voices. I really like listening to educators and teachers and professors and stuff like that speak because I don't know. I guess growing up with a teacher for a mom, it resonates a little more. But now that I'm older and I can actually understand what they're saying, I'm like, oh, this is actually pretty interesting. This is what she does for work. Like, holy crap! Like, it's pretty neat.
I mean, I'm still very fond of two teachers that I
But
had.
here, do you mind if I put you down for just? Oh, sorry. What was that?
I'm still very fond of two teachers I had that really inspired me. My third grade teacher and my 11th grade history teacher. The bad ones still have a nasty effect. The middling ones still have an effect, but the great ones have a great effect.
Damn right. That was Mr. Turk for me, I think, sophomore year. I had Miss Leathers in 3rd grade, who she occasionally says hi to me through my mom's Facebook, I guess. And yeah, God bless the good teachers out there because they really do make all the difference in the world. They make you feel like you can be something.
The shootings in
All right.
DC last night were 3 dead, 2 injured.
Jesus Christ. We had a crazy incident here. I think it was about 3 nights ago. We got an Amber Alert close to midnight, I think. And somebody had kidnapped a baby up in Washington. And they made it all the way to Eugene, I guess. And the interstate got shut down and there was a standoff with shots exchanged. But he executed his girlfriend, I think killed her mother. The cops rolled up to his house and found the corpse inside the building. And that's when they led chase. So he made it all the way from Washington to Portland. And then the Amber Alert got set off. And as soon as he got to Eugene, I know a couple people that were there. They said the highway was all shut down and you could hear gunfire, I guess. And I think he wound up dying by the end of it. The baby wound up being okay, but people are wilding out right now.
And what I especially hope is that people don't just get so desensitized that they give up on trying to have some kind of order, because for a long time in DC in the 90s, people simply gave up and stopped reporting anything other than a murder.
It's kind of gotten to that point in Oregon where the cops leave and tell you, they're like, if it's a violent crime, don't call us. Where I work, we've had 2 people pull butcher knives. One person grabbed it from behind the bar, and then another person skipped out on a meal. And he had a passive coming in and telling us he was suicidal and scaring customers. But he skipped out on a meal, refused to pay, came back with a knife from a nearby store, a butcher knife. And every single time it happens, the cops will just take the knife away and I think that guy got escorted off by cahoots, but the first guy, they just took the knife away and told him to have a nice day after talking to him for 5 minutes after he took a butcher knife from the bartender and pointed at her. And
Oh,
the cops, they can't do shit because we fucking came in with fucking knives and bats and masks and said don't do anything. And simultaneously everyone's like, well, fuck the police, they don't do shit and they never fucking have, and fuck them, why do we have them anyways? And it's just like, guys, do you not remember what you were screaming 5 years ago? Do you not think that there may be a correlation between the fact that things were getting addressed then the protests happened, then things stopped getting addressed, and now we're here? You know, it's no surprise that any of this is happening. Like, so I do think a lot of people aren't reporting it anymore. And the downside is someone could kick my door in and I could shoot them. And even if I don't kill them, they could sue me or I'll go to jail for kicking in my door and coming after me.
And I'd say that's ridiculous, but a lot of crazy laws were passed about 5 to 3 years ago.
Yeah, a lot of what happened Trump era needs to be examined, and not necessarily things that came from Trump, things that came from the left. And I'm sure there's a few things that came from Trump that need to be examined. But the things that people did in reaction to Trump, like, that's where a lot of this communist bullshit that's been coming. Like, a lot of the DEI CRT crap, a lot of that was Trump. It's just, there has to be some sort of cleanup for the mess made by Trump derangement syndrome, because a lot of the worst policies we're dealing with now are a result of that, and they weren't made in good frames of mind at all. And that's not to say that we need to exonerate Trump and see him as a good president and da-da-da. I still think he has faults. I think he's right about a lot of shit, but I'll be sitting there listening to his speech and I'm like, yeah, I can't believe I'm agreeing with that. Yeah. And then he's like, and then we need to do stop and frisk. And I'm like, I don't like that. Or, you know, a lot of the things I feel like he would do in terms of the drug war wouldn't make things better. So I have disagreements.
I mean, to me, Trump just seems like a somewhat typical grandiose buffoonish politician. He's not really good at the whole, he's not presenting an illusion of intellectual ability, rather something else. But guess what? America's been a democracy for a long time. He's not the first buffoonish politician to get elected. But people acted like his being a buffoon was somehow the end of the world. So to me, that seems more like there was some pre-existing apocalyptic mindset than whatever Trump did to trigger that.
Oh, I mean, for sure. I mean, like, Black Lives Matter, that started under the Obama administration. Obama got into a lot of people's heads about racial politics and global warming. And then you had all these people predicting the end of the world by 2020, 2030, no, 2040 this time, no, 2050 this time. And then you have this guy coming along that just seems to break all the rules of reality when you've been told reality is going to break. Yeah. I think they were waiting for somebody like Trump. If it wasn't Trump, it was going to be somebody else like Trump that they could use. Because I really think that Trump, his whole purpose to the deep state and to the prior administrations was to be a deflection point. We're going to point to Trump now. We're not going to point to Barack Obama and George Bush or Clinton. We're going to point to Trump. And I mean, look at Clinton. All his Epstein ties. Man's a diddler. You know, some people will say allegedly. I'm going to say no, I think he's a diddler. He'll bring up Trump in the same conversation and just completely deflect to that. And everyone's like, yeah, Trump was pretty bad. And it works. So I think if it wasn't Trump, it would have been Bernie Sanders or anybody else that they could have used.
Yeah, probably. Because it seems like so much of the American left is not an ideology. It's a mental illness in the guise of an ideology, rather than being, oh, we have a clear and coherent plan for the minimum wage. And then suddenly switch over to, we have deep and sincere concern about racial issues. Yeah, right. Scooch over a few more years. We have deep and abiding concerns about, what's the latest thing? Palestine. It's like it's a succession of obsessive moments rather than a serious understanding that there's multiple issues in a society.
Yeah, and realizing that you should really find a focus if you really care about these things. Like, the more I'm doing this podcast, the more I'm realizing, holy shit, I don't have time to go on to all these old podcasts that I like to go on, or I don't have time to go over here and focus on this issue, because now I'm like, I have to be a little bit more focused on what I'm doing. And that's kind of nice, because before then I felt like I had to solve all of the world's problems in my head all at once on any given day. So it's like having a focus helps, I think. But these kids need to realize they can't solve everything. And I think that's what they want, is they want the one thing that's going to come through and solve everything. And it's like, so at this point, you're just leaving yourself open for, we'll get religious with it, some antichrist, some Mahdi figure to come along and to just scoop you up because you just want to fucking, you're the anti-religion. You're anti this, you're anti that, you're anti God, you're anti all these things, but you're really not at the end of the day. Like, you're being anti these things is actually summoning these things like some sort of demonic spirit out of the void. It's like racism wasn't really as much of a problem. I mean, not to say it wasn't a problem, there weren't things that need to be addressed. There were, for sure, and I'm not trying to diminish that. But pre Trump era George Floyd BLM versus post, the amount of real racism that had to be dealt with versus now, vastly different, way more amped up. That was summoned. That was like, people laughed at us during the protest, and they're like, you're just going to make it more racist and you're just going to make things worse. And I would always laugh at those people, but then I would also walk away after laughing and be like, what do they
I'm
mean?
I'm my own tiny little conspiracy theory is, and I'm tempted to believe this, I'm not sure if I do, but the dysfunctional behavior of BLM, of Antifa, was all just some big plot to kind of solidify to basically destroy the left and have and destroy the moderate right and just have a sincere, powerful, determined right-wing backlash from the worst elements. Because so much of the stupidity about racial issues is turning the most racist, horrible people into martyrs.
Mm-hmm.
And if they're martyrs, well, the smart set, the intellectually curious set is going to be attracted to them. And no totalitarian system can last forever. It's going to crumble. And people are going to gravitate towards whichever side seem to be the most intellectually serious opponents of it. And by squashing the moderates, they just empower the nut jobs.
Yeah, and that's one thing that like scares me about this book is like the Turner Diaries. I always forget where the camera's at. But the things that happen in this book, this was considered the Nazi Bible for a while, I guess, and the author was basically envisioning a liberal dystopian America. And it's things that maybe 10 years ago you'd read at, and it's like one example is like all the cops are black now. They got rid of all the white cops. So they've done diversity to the point where they've forced white people out of all sorts of avenues of life. So it's talking about these white supremacists who are going through America as this is happening, and all of the crazy liberal, diverse, dystopian policies that they're seeing from what this guy thought a liberal hellscape would be. And the more and more time goes on, it's like, no, they're proposing things directly out of this book, almost as if to summon the people who believe in this book to act. It's accelerationism. Like
God,
yeah, like they become the cliches. Like the liberals right now in the modern day have become exactly what the paranoid delusion of a far right person might have been like 10 or 20 years ago. Like in their head, the 2020 liberal rainbow haired dyke screaming about the death of white people, that's what was going in their mind, but wasn't really a thing. Now it's a thing. So now they're even more determined, which is scary, because I've watched some videos with ex-Nazis who they talk about the future that the Aryan Brotherhood or the neo-Nazis said that would happen, and how they didn't believe it was going to happen, and how when they saw how wrong they were, they walked away. But I've watched a couple of those interviews where some of the things that they said didn't happen and weren't going to happen have actually happened. So part of me wonders if that's a way, if that happens, if that remagnetizes and repulls people back into the far right to where they're like, holy shit, you were right about that. Guys, I was wrong. They've been calling for my death ever since I left you guys. I feel more safe with you. They really want to kill all the white people out there. I'm scared. So I think it has the effect of that as well. Not that I've seen, but one that I theorize.
That seems kind of plausible. And that seems plausible. That seems very dangerously plausible.
Like, I would like to think the majority of people wouldn't do that, but I guarantee you, if it's a thought I've had speculative in my head, it's probably a thought other people have had too. The same kind of thought pattern to where when I left Antifa and I started to realize that there were people on the far right saying some right things, where I'm like, could I join a militia? To what extent do I? Is this all right? And then I have to scale it back with that was really wrong what you just heard there. You know, damn right that's fucking wrong, and you may be able to agree with them on that, but you know for sure what you're dealing with here. Don't get into this utopian thinking. You don't need another in group. You just need to be yourself, evaluate, be nuanced. But I think there is a natural pull for people to want to try to find their tribe, or maybe even go back
And
to their tribe. Stockholm syndrome, you know.
and tribes can be manipulated. Oh God. This is, well, hopefully there will be a rising tide of cynicism that makes people less vulnerable to manipulation. But we're not going to get it better
I
if
think
we.
it's going to happen.
I mean, to me, America, when I came to America, it was a high trust society. Now I would describe America as a low trust society.
Mm-hmm.
But, well,
Yeah, I can't
okay.
think of an instance of anybody trusting anything.
Uh, C.S. Lewis, the Screw Tape Letters. It's a fun read.
Oh, haven't heard of that one.
It's basically C.S. Lewis. How would devils write to each other trying to tempt a mortal man? But the dynamic between the devils is provide food or be food. Lots of polite niceties, but at the end of the day, it's if you don't give me something, I will eat you.
Yep, and if that ain't fucking everything about the modern day left.
And
Jesus.
I mean,
The devil is alive on earth.
mm, well, that's really messed up, man. But I suppose if you're feeling bad about yourself, watch Duet, and it's worth watching Goodbye Lenin for
Yeah,
the family
absolutely.
dynamics.
I got a whole list you're giving me. I love this. I love getting a list of new things to watch. Well, it looks like, did we just almost talk for 3 hours?
Yeah.
Oh, I love it. I love long form discussion. I feel like this is more appropriate for these kind of talks than hour and a half. I don't know. I've always loved a long podcast personally. But yeah, I guess anything we should close out on, or any closing
Um,
thoughts or anything else you want to address?
well, here's a question. Uh, do white lies carry a
Yeah.
cost similar to black lies?
Sorry, you cut out a little bit there. I'm so sorry for the bandwidth today. What was that?
Do white lies carry a cost like black lies?
I think all lies carry a cost. I don't think there's any way to hold the weight of one lie over another. I think that's what I'm starting to learn is big lies are just as destructive as little lies. My estimation. That's what I feel. All right. Well, I guess is that it for that?
I suppose I've got stuff to do in about 2 hours, so
Oh,
I should probably be getting ready to do that.
absolutely. Yeah, I gotta get ready for work here soon too. Should we link up again here in the near future?
Oh, please. Uh,
Heck,
uh,
yeah, I would absolutely love to do that again. Let me know whenever you get some free time, and I will make sure I have some bandwidth.
Greetings to all of you in the language of love, the universal language. Beauty is the splendor of truth. Use your hearts for what your hearts are for. Fill them with light. Do not fill them with darkness. The light of the human heart, when it's given faith, if it were opened up, it would blind the world. May this message give us eyes with which to see, ears with which to hear, and hearts with which to love each other and to love the world and to do good.
You're not using your heart for what hearts are for. They've been trying to shut us down our whole life. I thank God for healing. You ain't gotta get me lit, I got my own light. Thank God for listening. Listen, you've been trying to build me up my whole life. I thank God for building. You ain't gotta get me lit, I got my own light. I thank God I'm living. Sometimes I feel like a stranger. Maybe I ain't from here. World going crazy. How could that be unclear? Know that I'm a soldier. Hearts on my battleground. Sword in the holster. Had to come back around. I ain't trying to hide away. I just had to meditate. I ain't got a lot to say. What the ancestors made. Speaking to the whole globe. Numbers don't occur to me. You can listen solo. Cause you're the whole world to me. I jump in with both feet. Nothing low key. You can find me where I'm supposed to be. Where my folks be. If you listen very closely, you know who chose me. Nothing that I own owns me, and so I'm so free. I remember being hungry, needing groceries. Nighttime getting no sleep till my nose bleed. Got a message to the police. You're not using your heart for what hearts are for. They've been trying to shut us down our whole life. I thank God for healing. You ain't gotta get me lit, I got my own light. Thank God for listening. Listen, you've been trying to build me up my whole life. I thank God for building. You ain't gotta get me lit, I got my own light. I thank God I'm living. Not for 1 second, I believe what you're telling me. I know you invent the disease and sell the remedy. Universe is sending me centuries of memories. So the very breath that I breathe is all I ever need. I got that Muhammad Ali up in my pedigree. Yes, I be speaking my peace up in my 70s. Ain't worried about you threatening me. I'm just being honest. I ain't buying fear just because it's all you got left. We just wanna make love till we wake up. I believe whoever made us envisioned greatness. And you know they wanna paint us with the same brush. Wanna entertain us till we fill our grave up. Alright, okay, but when it's all said and it's all done, and I look back at the trophies I won, I will only count one. I'm using my heart for what hearts are for. They've been trying to shut us down our whole life. I thank God for healing. You ain't gotta get me lit, I got my own light. Thank God for listening. Listen, you've been trying to build me up my whole life. I thank God for building. You ain't gotta get me lit, I got my own light. I thank God I'm living, and I know who I am. I know whose I am. On your wings I fly, in your shoes I stand. I'm animated by love, I don't move by chance. Any stage I touch, any place I stand, there y'all land. Living in the world as it is, cracked vessel I am. No more and no less than a man. Any possessions that I have are just in my hand. I balance them the best that I can. I'm not making no claims, but I'm using my heart for what hearts are for. All the beauty in this whole life. I thank God for healing.